All right, and in the background, I trust we're live now.
Okay, are we live, Stephanie?
Excuse me, Your Worship, we are live, yes.
Okay, thanks, Chris. All right, Council, it's a little after 2 p.m. and I will call the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee to order. I'll start with the land acknowledgement. Today, we acknowledge that Collingwood is located on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe peoples, and on lands connected with the Lake Simcoe Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818. This is the home of a diverse range of Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to our society. And I will look for a motion to adopt the agenda, and the motion reads that the content of the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee agenda for May 3, 2031 be adopted as amended. And there are 4 additional items. A deputation added. 4.3, separate downtown Shipyards public realm plan with Don May, Pat Bollenberghe, John Campbell, and Brian Denney. Number 2 is a consent agenda item added. 5.4, waterfront owners and residents, Shipyards development standards and design guidelines. Item 3, under other business, CAO Skinner will be providing an update on the ICBL. And item 4 is an additional in-camera item. So I get a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Madigan and Councillor Berman, all in favor? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunders. And I just wanted to make sure that the addition to in-camera was the one I had requested. If not, I have another addition to request of council.
Okay, I'll look to the clerk to confirm that. The additional item on the in-camera is the, okay, I'll look to CAO Skinner to confirm that. Go ahead, Sonia.
I can confirm that the additional item was the one requested by Councillor Jeffrey. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. So then go ahead, Councillor Comey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Where would I find this on the agenda? The agenda I had before me when I logged in at 2 p.m. did not contain a mention of either of these. Where is this now, please? Through you to the clerk.
Sarah, go ahead.
Certainly, to all of council, you may have to refresh your agenda and it will pop up with the 2 additional items. And they
Okay.
are item 10 as well as other business, number 8.
And is the closed session agenda updated as well?
It should be, yes.
Okay, thank you. It's a little disconcerting after already logging in, having an agenda in front of you to have items added literally minutes before. So I just want to make note of that. Thank you.
Duly noted. All right, Council, unless there's any other questions or comments, I'll call the vote on the agenda. Approval, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Declarations of pecuniary interest. Council, are there any declarations? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. It's specific to item 6.1 on the agenda with regards to the judicial inquiry. If the report is received, there is no conflict, and I'll stay at the table. If the discussion veers into discussion about a particular item or even a recommendation, I will step away as my name is clearly identified within that report. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other declarations, Council? Seeing none, if you find yourself in that position as we move through the agenda, please raise it. This brings us to item 4, deputations. Today we have 3. First deputation is recommendations on affordable housing. We have Robert Voigt, Kory, Chisholm, and Mira Ortved on behalf of the Georgian Triangle Development Institute. I see Mr. Voigt. Are we getting your other deputants with you? There we go. Ms. Ortved and Mr. Chisholm. Welcome. You have 10 minutes. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council.
As you know, my name is Robert Voigt, and I'm the president of the Georgian Triangle Development Institute and a registered professional planner. And you've noted that our vice president, Kory, is with us, and board member Mira. We no longer have the luxury of time to contemplate actions to address our housing crisis. It's punctuated by rising prices, reduced options, approvals processes that favor the wealthy, and demand outpacing supply. Just as the global health crisis hit our community, GTDI was working on this project and had spoken to a number of council at that time. Understandably, everyone's focus shifted and our housing crisis got worse. GTDI completed our work and submitted their recommendations to council last month on April 1st. Last week, the town implemented an interim control bylaw halting all building permits, creating even more housing challenges. However, the recommendations outlined in GTDI's 10 for 2021 are as sound and timely as ever. Sustaining and building a great community involves many different processes. And because these recommendations deal with the preparations that happen before homes are built and the communication and collaboration needed to do so, they're not delayed by this recent action. We present these as a way of working collaboratively with the town, and these are housing supportive best practices that have been used in communities throughout the province. They're easy to understand. They benefit everyone who wants to create homes of any kind in our community, and they are within the town's 3 areas of greatest responsibility: policy, regulations, and process. And they could all be implemented this year. So I'll turn it over to Kory and Mira to briefly outline the items in our 10 for 21 housing recommendations.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks, Council, for taking the time to hear our deputation today. We are advised this committee meeting was the most appropriate forum for facilitating discussion with all of Council, so we'll try to be very brief and allow the most opportunity at the end to answer questions and for further discussion. Our first 3 recommendations in our 10 for 21 center around planning policy, which is one of the 3 main facets we've identified that is in the control of the town. These recommendations include driving positive change through the town's new official plan process, aligning land uses with provincial policy to increase housing diversity, supply, and sustainability, and to establish a community land trust to create permanent attainable housing within the town. The timing is well aligned with where the town is at with the new official plan process. It's an opportune time to implement established best practices within the town's new official plan and proactively plan for the remaining designated greenfield areas in the town that will need to be unlocked in order to plan for the next 30 years of growth as directed by the province. This is especially important as Collingwood is identified as one of the 5 primary settlement areas within Simcoe County in the provincial growth plan. Additionally, the establishment of a community land trust is a successful best practice in other municipalities and how the town can proactively facilitate citizens coming together and bringing more permanent attainable housing supply online within the town. Our next 3 recommendations center around regulation, another facet of the development process that is in the control of the town. Those include better aligning the town zoning bylaw in order to facilitate development that meets community goals, piggybacking onto the zoning bylaw recommendation, updating parking standards to reduce costs through contemporary best practice, and finally, to update the current town urban design manual to incorporate current best practice and help streamline process. Timing of these recommendations also aligns well with where the town is at initiating the new official plan process, as it is typical for urban design and zoning bylaw updates to follow suit. Simple changes to the current zoning bylaw can help facilitate additional soft intensification type projects and remove the barrier of applications such as a zoning bylaw amendment, which can be daunting for individual homeowners looking to undertake small scale projects such as consents and accessory units. Additionally, minimum parking standards are often the primary barrier to entry for many multi-unit residential projects, especially in intensification settings where space is often limited and at a premium. Eliminating minimum parking requirements for these projects and allowing the market to determine what an individual project needs to functionally operate can facilitate more innovative multi-unit residential projects and provide for a more diverse housing stock within the town. With that, I'll pass it over to Mira to go through the remaining 4 recommendations outlined in our 10 for 21.
Hi all, my name is Mira. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. As Kory alluded to, I'm going to be speaking to the recommendations 7 through 10. I'm going to start with the first 3 recommendations, which are 7 through 9, realigning community development, streamlining the pre-consultation process, and prioritizing attainable housing. For those of you that don't know, I'm a real estate lawyer in town, and something I didn't realize until I started practicing real estate law, and now that I've gone over many complex worksheets with purchasers of newly built homes, is that all the costs the builder puts into the planning process, servicing the lots, and then constructing the actual units on the lots gets built into the purchase price. So in planning environments where the planning process is very long and complex, there's additional costs built into there to the builders and to the participants in those processes. They're carrying costs of carrying the property and also the sunk cost to experts, for things like getting complex drawings created at the pre-consultation process. For large developers, large corporate developers, this isn't as much of an issue because they have deep pockets and the expertise on site. But what we're hearing from our membership is that in the current planning environment in Collingwood, the cost gets to be so large that the resulting purchase price is just not ending up in the attainable housing category. For individuals, small businesses and homeowners that are going through the process to get consents to create accessory units or legal secondary units, these are just barriers to entry, these costs. There's even exclusive businesses in town that are specializing exclusively in helping individuals, helping homeowners go through this process because it is so complex. So the rationale for all 3 of these recommendations is let's make the process as streamlined and efficient as possible so that attainable housing is more feasible. And I assume that would be helpful for the town as well, as I expect resources are limited. The final recommendation I'm going to speak to is the Community Builders Forum. So the recommendation here is that we establish some kind of regular meeting that happens between all the stakeholders in the development industry, builders and the town and any other stakeholders like services that are provided to the development industry. At the council meeting last Wednesday on the ICBL matter, the resounding theme from all the people who are making submissions was that they want to be collaborative with the town. The town even made an amendment to the bylaw to express that it wanted to be collaborative with the industry on development matters. So the rationale for this recommendation is let's make a formalized process where the stakeholders are getting together regularly and fleshing through these issues, whether they relate to attainable housing or any other development issues. And with that, I'll give it back to Rob.
So the 10 for 2021 was a result of extensive effort by professionals that worked throughout the province to come up with a clear and concise set of actions that the town could take to make us one step closer to addressing our housing crisis. You have consistently stated your commitment to open and transparent communication and collaborative problem solving with the public and stakeholders. So we make one final recommendation, and this is following up on what Mira was just saying, that council start the process of implementing all these actions with number 10 and launch the Community Builders Forum for the public and stakeholders to come together to discuss development issues, just like other communities in the province have done. This is the end of our presentation, and as always, the GTDI is a willing and key partner for moving forward, and we're happy to answer your questions now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob and Kory and Mira, for your presentation. Council, are there any questions or comments for our presenters? Councillor Hamlin?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question on procedure, if I could just ask you. I wanted to recommend a resolution for council arising out of this presentation. Would this be the appropriate time?
You would put your notice of motion on the table and then we would deal with it at the next council meeting. But if you want to do that now, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. By way of preliminary comment, I just wanted to say I very much appreciate the presentation that's been done here. And I know a lot of work's gone into coming up with all these recommendations. I find it's very timely. The town has, of course, recently set up an affordable housing task force. And thank you, Robert, for participating in that. What I would like to move is that the submission, there's 2 parts to this, that the submission of the GTDI be forwarded to our Affordable Housing Task Force. as well as the consultant engaged in preparing our new official plan. And secondly, that a staff report on how best to implement a community builders forum be provided to council at staff's earliest convenience.
Okay, thank you for that. So you've read that in. I don't know that we need a notice of motion to pass the report on. It's now a public document to the task force, but certainly the second element for the staff report will require that. So thank you for that, Councillor Hamlin. Any other questions or comments, council? Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. I don't want to steal any thunder from the CAO later in this meeting. However, I would ask whether there is some meetings involving our development community being contemplated in the days and weeks to come in light of what happened on Monday when we put in place the interim control bylaw.
Yes, and I'll actually answer that first. Yes, we are. We're actually meeting with some local engineers tomorrow to start that process, to get their input on the capacity and mitigation issues. And we will be definitely meeting with our development community as well as other stakeholders as we move forward on the ICBL. And we're looking forward to that. So CEO Skinner, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you, Your Worship. All that I would add, and I don't know if Mr. Voigt would like to make comment, was that I was quite pleased that when I called him and he was on his way somewhere important, I think he pulled over immediately to talk to me and made the GTDI folks available at the first time frame that the town suggested. And we're really appreciative of them as partners in the community. I look forward to both the regular meetings and a lot more conversation about the complexity and fees and that kind of thing that have been set out today.
Go ahead, Robert.
Through your worship, one thing to note is as we stated in our presentation, obviously the interim control bylaw, because of all its implications above and beyond just housing, is top of mind. But as we said, these recommendations were presented before that and are independent of that in many ways. It was even noted by the town's attorney that he didn't see anything that would stop the processes from moving forward. And that's what this is about. And I'd like to note again that when we're talking about the recommendation of the Community Builders Forum, the expectation is that that includes the public as well. Right, so we have meetings, of course, with our engineers and the town's engineers. And by ours, I mean the GTDI. Of course, any other party out there should and we expect to be engaged with the town. We're not, we don't have a monopoly on that, but those meetings we're suggesting are outside of the ICBL conversation. This is a much bigger issue, and I think we can all collectively hold more than one thought in our minds and work on multiple projects, although they are interrelated.
Any follow-up, Councillor McLeod?
Yes, and as far as I understand it, on holding multiple, following up on what Mr. Voigt has just said regarding holding multiple thoughts in our minds, Mr. Voigt, you're a member of the Affordable Housing Task Force, are you not?
Through your worship, yes, I am. That again was something that started before this latest hurdle, and if I may speak completely freely, this was something that was of significant discussion within our membership if we should continue on with that because of the actions of the ICBL. We chose to continue on because of its importance. Whatever the outcomes, eventually will be on the other side of the ICBL issue. Hopefully sooner than later. Worst case scenario, it is a much further later. But this housing crisis will still continue, and so we remain at the table accordingly.
And just one,
yeah.
Thank you, because I know each one of the council members has received this 10-point memorandum from the GTDI. I'm assuming that the members of the Affordable Housing Task Force who are members of this council have already seen it, and I suspect that it's already been brought to the Affordable Housing Task Force, or has it?
I'll look, Robert, has it been brought to the attention of the task force that you know of?
Through your worship, yes. Again, didn't want to hijack the conversations there, but as it came up with background information, I noted that we had submitted that. The Housing Task Force is, as you know, focused on 4 very particular items. This does relate to a number of those, and we're doing our best to make sure that there's the appropriate overlap and not hijacking it with this most pressing issue.
Thank you so much. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Well, thank you to the 3 of you. If there's no more comments, Councillor Comey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Voigt, just of course, thank you so much for this thoughtful presentation. I was wondering if afterwards, and I'm sure any member of council might like it or not, I would like to learn more, please, about recommendation number 5 as it relates to parking. This is something sort of new to me, what you've laid out here. Of course, I'm always pro-active transportation, but you're laying out something in front of me that I'm intrigued to learn more about. And I was just wondering if I could trouble you or a member of your team maybe to send some additional reading material or where I could learn a little bit more about that topic in particular. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Through your worship, yes, Councillor, we'd be more than happy to provide you with further background information. I will note that every one of the recommendations here is no longer really cutting edge. These are things that have been implemented in numerous communities across the province. What you're seeing here is best contemporary practice. Fair enough that if you're not particularly dialed into the details of parking or other process issues, understood that people may not know. But these are all things that we can show where it's been used successfully. And we wanted to make sure that our recommendations by no means are these, a complete list of everything that could be done. We wanted to give council those first steps that would be easy to implement within this year and addressed issues of policy and process and regulation. So helping as much as we can do a fair amount of the heavy lifting and not requiring you or your staff to be doing endless amounts of research on this. So happy to help, meetings, workshops, you name it. Our commitment is to move this along however you need.
Thank you, Council. Any more questions? Well, I want to thank go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Voigt and to the other 2. Thank you for your presentation. I just want to confirm, and my understanding is that your hope is that this would be a regional approach and that you'll be hoping to make a similar presentation, if not already, to the other neighboring municipalities. Is that correct?
Through your worship to Deputy Mayor, yes, we're not just picking on Collingwood. The timing was the launch of Collingwood's official plan last year. As I noted, the global health crisis had us not only reacting, but we understood that council had very pressing issues dealing with the potential collapse of the businesses along Main Street, that core of downtown. And so we understood that the attention that we could place ourselves as well as the town just wasn't going to be there in the beginning months of this. Our intent is to provide similar recommendations. Yours are contextual to Collingwood, to our 5 member municipalities, which are Clearview, Wasaga Beach, yourselves, Town of the Blue Mountains, and the town of Meaford. And of course, they have different circumstances, and so their recommendations will be appropriately targeted. That's a long yes.
Thank you for that. Thank you to the 3 of you, and thank you to the GTDI for your time and contribution on this important topic and for agreeing to be on the task force, Robert. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Council.
Thanks, Council.
Thank you.
This brings us to our second deputation, item 4.2, current and future capacity of Collingwood's primary health system, the Rural Ontario Medical Program. And who do we have?
Your Worship, we have Dr. Harry O'Halloran and we have Miss Michelle Hunter.
welcome Dr. O'Halloran, and are we going to, and welcome Michelle Hunter. Welcome to both of you, and you have 10 minutes.
So we have 10 minutes between the two of us?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody. I see my slides coming up, so maybe I'll start. I'm Harry O'Halloran. I know many of you. I've been a family doc here since 1986. And I thought I'd run through a few slides here just to give you a little bit of background. We've been asked to come as a deputation to give some background information around physician workforce planning, and I'm happy to address you here. I would note that your last presentation was also a healthcare presentation, right? So that housing issue is clearly one of the social determinants of health, and that has a lot to do with the health of our population. I put this up as a bit of a, an acronym. We get too many acronyms, and I'm going to try and avoid acronyms, but there are so many of them. And I'll move to the next slide, if I may. These are some of the acronyms in primary care these days. And I don't expect you to recognize many of them, or certainly to know what they are, but just so you know that we all have our jargon. OHT is the Ontario Health Team, and that's where we locally are moving right now. If I can get the next slide, please. This is something I try and put up every time I do a presentation. I think that it's worth noting that physicians are always very caught up in evidence. So we want evidence before we make decisions. And the evidence around high-performing healthcare systems is that they are predicated on policy, emphasis on primary care, which is your first point of contact with the health system, on quality improvement, and on information technology. The evidence comes from high-performing healthcare systems around the world. So of course, Canada is not one of those. Canada has probably, out of the top 11, we're number 10 in the world, in the sort of Western civilized world. And that's partly because we have not had enough traditionally emphasis on some of these areas. So I find when I talk to Canadians, they're often surprised when they hear that our healthcare system is not universally regarded as such a great system. It's regarded locally as a lot better than the American system, but that's like comparing yourself to a pretty low bar. So maybe the next slide, please. So locally, we formed what's called an Ontario Health Team, and these are some of the expected services in Ontario Health Teams. And I'll just move to the next slide. I'll try and fly through some of this stuff. You'll have the slides for background if you're interested. Some of the core components of an Ontario Health Team, and those of you who've been around for a while in Ontario will recognize that we tend to be a land of pilot projects. So we tend to, have a new envisioning of the healthcare system every few years. We went through a thing called primary care reform about 20 years ago. And we've now landed on what I think is actually a very good concept, where some of the control over your local healthcare system devolves to the people in the local healthcare system. And so these are all the components that are felt to be key. And one of the things I think that needs to be recognized is there's a defined patient population. So our defined patient population actually revolves around our current patterns of practice. And that means that it's Collingwood, Wasaga Beach, Creemore, Stayner, Clarksburg, so town of the Blue Mountains to some degree, but doesn't extend beyond that. And I think, again, for context, that's worth your while to know. If we can move to the next slide. I was going to ask you, but I think it may be easier just to tell you. I don't know how many of you know, like, how many physicians are there in the area here? We have, within my organization, the Family Health Organization, we have 51 primary care physicians, so 51 family docs in Collingwood, Stayner, Wasaga Beach. It's a pretty big number. The average size practice is somewhere around 1,200 patients. So we have active 60,000 patients currently. We have 200,000 active charts because we take care of a broad population, as you can imagine, of people who don't actually reside here, but have a house here or a cottage or some kind of a property. And so we end up taking care of a lot of them. And with that, we've evolved over time quite an integrated system locally. And again, many of you will be somewhat familiar with that. I know Mayor Saunderson has come to some of our planning meetings, and others of you I know I've seen there too. Marianne McLeod would have some direct information from her time at the hospital. But certainly we tend to have a pretty integrated system. And that's been our strength over time. So if we can move to the next slide. The Ontario Health Team is sort of trying to leverage that rich history of collaboration. And we have used our connections and our relationships with home care, the CHC in Wasaga Beach, the hospital, obviously, Hospice Georgian Triangle, local midwives, local specialists. All of these people share a single database and a single electronic medical record, which is quite unique in the province. So that it's an exemplar for the province. We tend to be on the cutting edge and leading many of the initiatives provincially. And we probably don't toot our horn enough about that, but we get asked to speak in various places all over the province, trying to say, like, how did you guys get to this? How did you achieve this? And it all comes down to culture. It comes, when I came to town, people like Don Paul and Peter Savage and some of these names I know they expected a culture of collaboration. They expected us to be strong community partners. They expected us to have a relationship and a responsibility and a duty to the community. And that's been our culture. So over time, we've also had, as Michelle's going to talk about, the Romp Program, which is a rural Ontario medical program that brings in medical learners, particularly physician learners, but other learners as well, and introduces them to our culture. And that's been a great source of joy and work for the physicians who work here, but also has resulted in us being able to inculcate our culture in many of these learners, who then go on to be strong and productive members of our medical community. So that's our main way of attracting new physicians to town. I am getting to the point. Maybe we'll move to the next slide. This just gives some examples of some of the programs that we've set up with people. And again, Home for Life started in 2009 when Linda Davis, the CEO of our hospital at the time, and Maria Rose, family health team, myself, several other people sat out at Blue Mountain and tried to plot our future and said, like, how will we get to be the healthiest community in Canada? And we came up with some ideas for things like Home for Life. And then we moved on to the HealthLink Be Well program, which the town was quite involved with, which was a way of trying to address youth poverty and other aspects of health for them. So how does this relate to physician resource planning? A couple of things I think you need to know. One is that our geography probably does not overlap with the geography you're thinking about in terms of workforce planning. So I know Councillor Hamlin had sent me some questions about the thought of joining this workforce planning group that extends up to Meaford. Meaford has quite a different culture from a healthcare point of view. They're obviously a separate county, and they have quite a separate group of physicians who work with in a different geography, and they tend to send their patients more towards Owen Sound, where we tend to send our patients more towards Toronto and Barrie. They haven't had as strong or as collaborative a group, I would say. Over time, some of them have drifted this way. That's why we have the group from Clarksburg as part of our family health team and family health organization. And they struggle quite a lot to attract physicians. One of the things I noted in your questions, Councillor Hamlin, was around, I think you're referring to the managed entry program for family health organizations. So what that effectively means is that the ministry does not see Collingwood as having a need for more family docs. And it's pretty hard to make a case that we do in Collingwood need more family docs based strictly on population ratios. If the council were able to provide more up-to-date population data, that might be helpful for us in making our case and maybe getting more family docs into Collingwood. But to be fair, we probably need more family docs in Wasaga Beach, Clearview, Creemore, Stayner than we do in Collingwood proper. Having said that, we all work together, so it is a pretty integrated system, and it doesn't matter so much whether a doc is in Wasaga Beach or Collingwood or Creemore. We all do tend to work together. So my thinking around your workforce planning is that you have a pretty good system in place already. As a primary care medical group, we do have some workforce planning that we've had in place for a number of years. We've used population data to predict our needs, and we've interviewed on a regular basis every year, adding people as we see the need come up. So we've managed to have multiple new physicians starting up in Wasaga Beach, some starting in Collingwood, replacing current physicians, certainly new people starting in Clarksburg and Creemore. Not so much in Collingwood per se, but I would challenge that notion that there's a real desperate need for family docs right within Collingwood. We can always use more in the area, but we are pretty well served with 55 odd family physicians in this region who already share an electronic medical record. So not to say don't support family docs. I think there's a real role that you can play in retention and in data collection. And certainly, as your previous delegation talked about, addressing some of those social determinants of health, I think is a key role for council to have. But beyond that, I'm not so convinced that you should spend money on a physician recruiter per se. I think that would need to go through the local family docs, and I'm not sure that it would really be perceived as helpful, to be quite frank. I think it's well-intentioned and would be happy to talk about some ways that money could be put to good use. But I don't know that a physician recruiter would be your best bet. So anyway, I'll let Michelle say a little bit.
Okay, you've come up to your 10 minutes. So Michelle, I'll just give you a couple of minutes to sum up, please. Go ahead.
You're muted, Michelle.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Research and Innovation Day is coming up. Next slide will show you the topic for this year, and that's a great opportunity for collaboration between our communities. If you can flip forward to slide number 20, I'll quickly go through. We are looking, your pre-slides will show what we do for training, recruitment, and retention. And that's really what recruitment is all about. Right now, Collingwood has 198 months of training across 97 physicians, 78 of which are really the full-time teacher. But if you look at slide 20, what has changed for Canada's healthy community? If you want to keep moving forward. What are the numbers? And we know that COVID has done some numbers on, back one slide, please. 500,000 people have relocated from the GTA. And so really determining the need, as Dr. O'Halloran said, is going to be something that we look at. Is the old number of 1,250 patients per family physician the number to use? Do we need some new data? What are some of those realities from our region? Next slide, please. And those numbers can come from a variety of things, but I would challenge and say, it really does take 10 years to train a physician. You have some housing and population development over the next 10 years. Let's take a look. And we have research students to do that. Next slide, please. And what else can we do? We can look at communicating that result, whether there be letters of support to the ministry or promoting information and looking at our current collaboration within the pipeline. If you look back, you'll see we start in high school and we go all the way through to the late careerist. Next slide, please. And so again, primary care is a significant contributor to population health. The safety and well-being plan is significant for social determinants, but I yet again have this in my presentation because right now what's happening in other municipalities like yours, affordable housing and meaningful employment. Next slide, please. Where will our future healthcare professionals live? Unattainable housing is certainly something that our current providers are dealing with. And for our new learners, physicians coming to the community, where will they live? So what are those models of investment that other municipalities are looking at? Next slide, please. So where do we start? We really need the data. We need the numbers. What is that actual reality with all of the folks moving out of the GTA? And then how do we communicate that with all of our partners? The social determinants of health during one of our research days in 2018, we saw the South Georgian Bay do the Missing Middle World Cafe. This report was provided for the municipalities, so hopefully you can take a look at that. And again, it was on models for affordable housing. And again, who will be our healthcare providers? How will they live here? And next slide. So I will enjoy seeing you with the live stream. We have a really exciting COVID wellness session available. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle and Harry, for your presentation today. Councillor, are there questions or comments for our presenters? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I'd just like to thank our presenters. We are so proud of our medical professionals in our community and all that you do to keep us well. Love your emphasis on primary care and all the components that go into it, of course. As you know, and as Dr. O'Halloran mentioned, I sent you a list of some of the things that, questions I had as a member on a joint physician retention and recruitment committee that's been set up by our neighboring municipalities. And you're right, Meaford's a little bit of a different thing, but in any event, we sit together regularly. And this would be from Clearview, Town of the Blue Mountains, Collingwood, Meaford, and Grey Highlands, to just discuss how can we get more physicians into this area, because it has been recognized that overall, and I think you put it well, overall here, there is a shortage of family doctors. And I know from my own experience, when I moved into this area 10 or 12 years ago, it took me a long time to get a family doctor. And I still know lots of people who are commuting 2 hours to see their family physician who have lived here for years. And in fact, the counselors who are on this committee with me, just about all of them don't have doctors locally, but they're in Collingwood. So it shows what a center we are. We had someone come to our physician recruitment committee from one of the branches of Ministry of Health, and they followed up with us with some analysis of the oldest or the newest, I'll put, census data that we had access to, and how many doctors were in the area. And they thought Collingwood needed at least 3 family docs, and the area as a whole needed at least 8. So we started working with that information, and it sort of gave rise to why you were invited to speak here today, because you are such an important part of us moving forward and getting doctors to settle in the community and knowing all the ins and outs of that. I mean, you guys are where it's at. So without running off too far without you, we wanted to bring you here and have a bit of an exchange of views. The cap, we also learned a lot about the cap that you're talking about. Really, I was pushing that because I realized there was a cap here. The cap, I'm wondering if what you are offering, and so I'll just rephrase it a little bit. For the cap, we need to send into a different section of the Ministry of Health updated population numbers for Collingwood, growth projections, information on how many doctors are here, obviously, and there's a slew of information, and you're talking about how that needed to be updated. Are we the ones to be updating that information? And if we are, us as a town, is that something your researchers can help us with, or do you have any ideas around that? That's my first question.
I'd like to take that question.
Well, probably both of us would have a slightly different answer. Michelle might have a more practical answer in terms of research, but can I just adjust? I'm not sure what you mean by a cap. I think you're talking about the managed entry program. That's probably what you mean, which is meaning that there is a limit on certain areas receiving physicians, new entries into what are called faux programs. So a family physician can bill in various different models. There's fee for service, there's complex, what's it called, complex care. Anyway, there's several different models. The faux model, which is the model we use locally, does have limited entry in Collingwood, but not limited entry in Clearview, Creemore, Thornbury, Clarksburg, Wasaga Beach. So there is from a practical point of view, I'm not sure that it really has deterred us whatsoever. I would challenge your numbers. I don't know where you got those numbers. I don't think they're probably accurate with needing 3 more dogs in Collingwood proper, but I'd be happy to see where they came from and who put them together. If it's from the ministry, then they should change their what you're calling a CAP, the Managed Entry Program, because if they have those numbers, then they should follow through with that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll just respond to that briefly.
Well, just hold on. I think Michelle was going to give an answer as well, and then we'll get tie that off, and then you can ask any follow-up.
Well, I think that we'll suggest that we do have research students that through Canada Summer Jobs, the federal grant, we are fortunate enough to have both at CGMH and at Romp approximately 15 positions this year. So I think this is an opportunity for a student to support some of the data around the not only today, but perhaps you are also talking about your projections over the next 10 years. That's how long it does take to make a physician. So what would the numbers look like, but what are they actually from this impact of moving and changing in this current environment? So happy to help out with some of that data, whether it's coming from, again, the municipality, the government, and the local providers as well.
Thank you. A follow-up, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, through you, so appreciative of your offer, and we'll be in touch with you, I guess, Michelle, afterwards, after this meeting. And to Dr. O'Halloran, I'll just say it was someone from the Ministry of Health. It's our regional advisor who did these calculations, but as I take it, and I am so not familiar with the Ministry of Health, it seems to me to be a humongous organization. And there is yet another area of the Ministry of Health to which the numbers have to go. So the regional advisor said that she would help us. She's got a chart, she's ready to go. She needs numbers, she'll help us make the case. And then it goes, as I say, to another part of the Ministry of Health. Do not ask me what part. Okay. And then the other question I had through you, Mr. Mayor, on the physician recruiter, and I heard you suggest that it's not needed here, but maybe a further discussion will come out of updating the numbers and so on. But maybe I'll just ask you this question. Do you feel that the practices of your doctors in town can accept more patients right now?
Some can, yeah, not so much right in Collingwood proper, I have to say, but some still are in Collingwood. And there is through the home care, the Lynn Home Care, they maintain a what's it called now? There's a list of patients seeking a new doctor. Mm-hmm. And generally over the years, that traditionally has had about 100, 120 odd people on it, which, as you can imagine, if it takes 1,200 people to make a practice, does not equal a full-time physician. So that's part of the challenge, is that to actually have a full-time physician, you need to have 1,200 people to form a practice, more or less. I mean, some people have smaller practices for sure. But that's one of the challenges. But we are continually trying to bring in new physicians, generally through the Romp program for sure. I interviewed a physician who's starting May 1st in Clarksburg, for joining our group. I have another interview for someone who's joining in Stayner in the next few, they're starting in the summer, and another one starting in Creemore, taking the place of a physician there. So there are physicians around who are joining for sure.
Oh, that's fantastic. Sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
I was just going to add to that in terms of, what we can do. Is it really about needing a position, or do we really want to be cost effective here? We all have limited resources. You have challenges in Collingwood. And do we want to leverage the success and our current talent? And I think that those slides will show you in detail the activity that we are taking here that's unique and different. Casper, the Canadian Association of Physician Recruiters, came here in 2018 and said, Collingwood is the model we all aspire to. So let's look at that in terms of how they attract, how they recruit, how they retain, how they educate, and how they stay educated. But and really truly leverage that, and look at what our collaborative can do with physicians and the South Georgian Bay communities to look at the data, communicate the results, and then address social determinants.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Looking at the clock here, we're almost through our first hour of this meeting, and this has been a very helpful discussion. Perhaps if there's any additional questions, you can ask them offline to Michelle or Harry.
Okay, yes.
They're excellent resources.
Yes, I do have several more. And may I just ask this simple question? What is the best way to connect? Is it through Michelle? Through you, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah. Go ahead, Michelle. She's nodding, I think. So.
Okay, that's great. Thanks so much.
All right. And thank you very much to both of you and Harry for your leadership on our health team. It's been very impactful and extremely important for our community. The South Georgian Bay Alliance and the events that you hold. I know when I served on the health unit, this end of the health unit was very much held in high regard and as a model for the other health teams. So thank you very much for all you do, and thank you to your team. And to Councillor Hamlin's point, we have letters going out this week thanking all of our local physicians for the amazing work they've done over this very trying time.
Well, thanks so much. Pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
This brings us to item 4.3, separate downtown Shipyards public realm plan. We have Don May, Pat Bollenberghe, John Campbell, and Brian Denney, a group of men with a huge amount of experience in this area. So we look forward to hearing their thoughts. Okay, so I see Don May and Pat Bollenberghe. Don, do you want to get started?
Yes, thank you. Your Worship, Mayor Saunderson, Deputy Mayor Hull, members of council and committee, thank you for the opportunity for us as homeowners in the shipyards to be a deputation to this committee. I'm a resident of the waterside part, which was the first phase of the shipyards, and I'll present this PowerPoint, and then Pat can follow me, and then whether John or Brian are here to follow. So what we have to do first is describe what is public realm. So public realm is any publicly owned streets, roadways, sidewalks, parks, plazas, and other open spaces that comprise the shared space of a town for its visitors, employees, and residents. It is the space between the buildings where civic interaction occurs and is defined in contrast to private property, and it can include public easements with private developments. We have a map. So next slide. So we have an excellent Collingwood waterfront master plan, and it extends for 8 kilometers from the Hens and Chickens in the west to Sunset Point in the east. And it's divided into 7 precincts. And we're going to speak strictly to the downtown connection with the shipyards. Next slide. So in our original letter in March 11th, we said that great communities require commitment to their policies and master plans. Collingwood is realizing a wonderful opportunity to have people living in the downtown in mixed use environments with great walkable public spaces on the waterfront. And then with further information from the staff, we went on to clarify our position in the addendum, and there's really just 3 points there, and they are: we're not opposed to the 3 remaining developments which will complete the shipyards. Our concern is with respect to the remaining development, both private and the public realm that we're going to talk about, being in conformity with the town official plan. And last, the need for public involvement in developing the public realm areas in our waterfront. Next slide. So one of the key goals in the town strategic plan is public access to the waterfront. And it's different throughout the waterfront master plan, where some areas are very low density natural areas like the Arboretum, all the way to Sunset Point, where you have an active park. But the downtown connection through the shipyards is that urban extension to the waterfront, which is very focused on people spaces and walkways. And we have that around the existing shipyards with the promenade that everybody likes to come down and walk through. So this is really the focus as you get to the extension of Hurontario Street to what is the west side of the two bays where the shipyards is existing. Next slide. So in the waterfront master plan, the pink areas are all of the public realm areas. So you get Side Launch Way, which is the east-west street that's being developed just to the north of First in Hurontario. But the important windows, starting from the west, you have Maple, and then you have Pine Street. And then in the center here, you have the extension of Hurontario Street, which is a bit restricted as you go between Rexall and Admiral there into the main area, which is where the boat rental is and where the existing promenade is on the shipyards. But that will be where the next phase of FRAM builds in the pointed area. And then you have the Duncap at the back and streetcar at the front. So following on that and moving a little bit to the west of that is what we're really talking about, where you get St. Paul and St. Marie coming together at the Museum Square and going between what is now the Bank of Montreal Fairs building and the streetcar building. You've got a road allowance the municipality owns going through, and it lines up beautifully with what is the east side launch bay and that view. So all of those pink lands and the extensions of what is now the promenade, which will extend itself around the waterfront, are all the areas that we're talking about in terms of public realm. Next slide. So our success as a town depends on our ability to merge seamlessly the downtown with the shipyards waterfront. And now that we have a waterfront master plan, the present challenge is to successfully implement the plan. And we believe that the public realm aspects within the downtown and the shipyards should not be developed as a default by the private developments. It should have its own agenda and its own entity. We believe we need a separate and detailed plan for the public realm, which should be developed with public consultation and be used for analysis of the joining development. The public realm plan should have a separate implementation strategy for the public to be assured that these improvements will be done prior to or at the same time as the private development proceeds. Next slide. So to explain this in more detail, so we understand it, when you look at the St. Marie, St. Paul window, that's where the museum is in terms of the museum square. And you look at the town plans on the left side, you'll see the waterfront master plan and the official plan for the shipyard special policy area. You'll see that window that the town owns beside the Bank of Montreal building through that road allowance. And you'll see how it's shown as a major park thoroughfare through to the eastern side launch. Down below in the official plan, again, it's a public space area. It's not a car traffic area beside the Bank of Montreal's driveway. It's a main public square, and it's one of the important windows for us in connecting the downtown with the waterfront. And I should say the downtown has wonderful infrastructure, nice sidewalks, great public spaces, and with the help of the BIA and the town, it has a real life to it. And that's what we need in the waterfront eventually, is its life and its feeling as a people space. So when you switch to the right side and you see the applications coming in for the developers, which is great, those 3 developments will build it out.
Mr. Mayor, you're just coming up 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And so that space there is not a park. It's not for someone to use as part of the building. It's part of the spaces that have to be created. So without a separate plan, we're not able to put that picture of what is the public interest with that development together and work that through. So last slide. What we're simply asking is that council direct staff to prepare a detailed plan for the public realm within the downtown and side yards with public input and possibly a public advisory committee. And this plan should include resilient strategies to combat global warming, as well as to provide detailed construction plans and budgets for implementation in stages concurrent with the private developments in the shipyard. So I'll just pass it over to Pat. Thank you.
Do we have Mr. Bollenberghe? Do we have Pat on line?
Your worship, he should be unmuted now.
Can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you now, Pat. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'll just be very brief. I just wanted to support what Dawn has said with really from my experience in dealing with a number of built projects, that the most successful executed projects are realized when architecture and landscape architecture, urban design, and ecology work and speak to each other and are in harmony with each other. Because when they're dealt in isolation as individual elements, the opportunity to achieve a contextual and a coordinated and animated solution is much more limiting and much more challenging. And so we are here now with a waterfront that is coveted, that is unique. And the opportunity is here right now to create an animated, vibrant precinct and destination with strong connections within itself and to the existing downtown fabric. And in my view, the only way to truly create a successful waterfront in terms of moving it into its execution stage is that all three of these elements work together, and that when you are reviewing development applications that come forward, that they move forward as one: architecture, landscape architecture, and ecology. And in that way, I think you have the best opportunity to create truly a dynamic and successful waterfront for the town. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know I see Mr. Denney and Mr. Campbell. Do either of you wish to participate? I think go ahead, Mr. Campbell.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. I would make a brief point. I was the CEO for Waterfront Toronto for 13 years. That really led me to understand that great waterfronts are really a function of great public realm. Why? Because it draws people and it, excuse me, it draws people and it animates the area. So I would suggest it needs great design. It needs consistency throughout, not on a project by project basis. And I would stress that it really should be used to link the downtown and the waterfront. They should be seen as one place. And that by itself will really help to maintain the economic viability of the downtown, which is going to face, retail challenges going forward. So with that, I will pass it off to Mr. Denney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Campbell. Mr. Denney.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'm sensitive to your time constraints, Mr. Mayor, so I'll be very brief. My part of this was really just to make sure that we waved the climate change, extreme weather, and climate resiliency flag. But I know that with this council and with your staff team, you're bringing those kinds of considerations to all of the major issues that you have to deal with. In this particular case, there are, of course, a number of extreme weather and resiliency issues that need to be applied at the detailed stage, but I won't reiterate what Don and Pat and John have already talked about. I think most of what we would want to say about climate change would apply to the individual buildings to make sure that as they come forward, they are in fact as green as possible. And because they have such prominent locations in Collingwood, that they're demonstrating the kinds of buildings that Collingwood expects to see in the future. But we'll save that for when we're back in May. On May the 18th, I think we're dealing with a specific site plan application. So I'll just close by offering whatever assistance we can to council and to staff on all aspects of this, including the climate change considerations. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the four of you for your presentation and a lot of thoughtful comments in there. And I know there's a wealth of experience on these issues. Council, questions or comments on the presentation? Councillor Doherty and then Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would echo your thanks to our presenters today to remind us all that we are heading into the final phases of our waterfront development, and that the design and execution of our public spaces is equally, in fact, if not more important than the design of the private buildings that ultimately are going to be built there. I would, because I don't see that there is a motion included on our agenda, but I would move notice of motion for the two requests that have been outlined in Mr. May's letter in the consent agenda. I'm happy to read those out.
Yes, if you want to table your motion, you can do that now. And of course, it'll be dealt with at council at the next meeting.
Okay, so the notice of motion would be one that we request a staff planning report to confirm that we have the appropriate policies and guidelines to plan the completion of the shipyards with appropriate and common site plan features as outlined section 4.2 and 4.3 of the Collingwood Waterfront Master Plan prepared by Brooke McElroy. And secondly, to consider the need for additional public consultation and possible engagement of the significant expertise within our community, perhaps through an advisory committee, to achieve our common goals and aspirations for our waterfront as recommended in the Waterfront Master Plan. And it's especially important in the waterfront to have regard to Council's commitment to develop resilient strategies to combat global warming. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I can be brief because Councillor Doherty, very well said, and I'll second your motion. And I just wanted to add my thanks to these presenters today for their bringing forward such important issues at this critical time. I just couldn't be more happy. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Council, anyone else? Thank you very much to the four of you, and we will see you at the public meeting on May 18th. Thank you. All right, Council. This brings us to the consent item 5, which is the consent agenda. And the motion reads that the Standing Committee herein receive the general consent agenda, and further that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda items are those of the authors and are not verified or approved as being correct. And there are 4 items: 5.1 GTDI recommendations on local housing crisis, 5.2 various support for paid sick leave pieces of correspondence, 5.3 Premier Doug Ford letter recalling with judicial inquiry recommendations, and item 5.4 waterfront owners and residents, shipyards, development standards and design guidelines. We'll look for a mover and a seconder to get the consent agenda. Councillor Berman and Councillor Doherty, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. Councillor, are there any items of the consent agenda you'd like to pull? Seeing none, then we will move on to item 6, staff reports, and item 6.1, CAO 2021-5, Collingwood Judicial Inquiry, next steps following public consultation. And I will pass it over to CAO Skinner for the presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. Staff have listened to council and to the community to put together these next steps. We wanted to thank everybody in the community that has provided input. And I have asked the clerk's office to do 2 things within this presentation. One is to summarize what we heard from the community, and another is to look at the policy development, which is important policy development that will go forward. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask her to provide that summary and recommendations to you, and we both would be happy to answer any questions that come out of these set of recommendations. Thank you.
All right, thank you, CEO Skinner. So first slide, obviously, is the purpose of this report as outlined by CEO Skinner, refers to our next steps following our comprehensive public consultation regarding the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry. Our next slide identifies the consultations and input opportunities that have been provided. So through our various meetings that we've had, through strategic initiatives, various council meetings, the input that we've had through our town commission council, as well as input from our former CAOs, John Brown and Farida Min, as well as the beginning of the formal consultation with the launch of the Engage Collingwood on March the 25th, which included a lot of background information, educational material, Q&A, as well as an opportunity to provide questions and comments and receive that input. We had the virtual town hall public meeting on April the 7th. That was an open forum for the public to address various areas within the Judicial Inquiry recommendations, as well as any other items that they thought merited council's further consideration. And there has been some various stakeholder consultations, whether that's been through various ministries, through AMO, through the Association of Municipal Clerks and Treasurers, Simcoe County, MPP Jill Dunlop, as well as Premier Ford. Our next slide. And sorry, this slide is a little faint. However, this is how the statistics show up through the Engage Bang the Table platform. So as a result of this public engagement on the site, over the 3-week period, there was a total of 320 visits. The definition for an engaged visitor means a visitor who's contributed on the forum or viewed the FAQs, participated in a Q&A, asked questions, and viewed multiple pages. An informed visitor means a visitor who has visited multiple pages, visited some key dates, or downloaded a document. An aware visitor means a visitor who is at minimum visited the homepage with the educational material and the FAQs that are on the site. So our next slide. So of the Q&A comments and questions that we did receive, there was a total of 26. Again, all of these questions have been posted on our Engage Collingwood site with answers. And we did identify themes to the number of 26 items that were received. Basically, the top 3 included cost containment, budgeting and replenishing reserves, and any sort of criminal activity and next steps pursuant to that. Slide number 6. Here identifies the areas as was presented at our town hall virtual forum. So we lumped them into these 5 different categories. So council and staff, business and lobbying, OPP and legal action, judicial inquiry process, and other. Our next slide. We'll get into the recommendations that we have provided as our next steps. So the report includes a number of recommendations pertaining to the mayor, council members, CAO, and staff, and a total of these equate to 47% of the actions that have been identified. There are a number of recommendations within the report that identify opportunities to further revise and implement policy changes to increase transparency, accountability, and public trust. As further identified in the Simcoe County report, there has been some recommendations that raise more complex and difficult issues from a legal perspective and should be careful when being considered by various municipalities and even the province, because they could have unintended consequences for various types or sizes of municipalities. So this is the recommendation that we have put forward. A number of these have already been worked on over the past, I believe, probably 5 to 6 months. And this is the timeline that we believe is reasonable to expect full updates, if not sooner than what's being proposed. So we're looking for direction from council to support staff in completing the necessary review, development, or revisions to the following policies. They include the procedural bylaw, HR employment contract review, council staff relations policy, harassment in the workplace, code of conduct, for, as recommended to in the inquiry report, having a specific code of conduct as legislated municipal act for council and local boards, but we also have one for advisory committees. We think it's beneficial to actually separate that out and have an advisory committee code of conduct, as well as a code of conduct for staff. Right now we have 2 or 3 various policies that touch on conduct and various ethical behaviors. We believe that they should be consolidated and updated as appropriate, as well as our accountability and transparency policy. Our next slide is a recommendation. We also feel that not only is it important to update these policies, but to have a scheduling timeframe associated with them. So we're looking for council direction to support scheduling for council staff, boards, and committees pertaining to accountability, transparency, and ethics. And these training programs include council orientation, which we do, and it's usually within 30 days following an election. The orientation of local boards and committees within 30 days following appointment, council staff relations policy, that there's actually an annual training session associated with that. For procurement, a minimum of every 2 years. Code of conduct and municipal conflict of interest training, we believe should be undertaken annually. Procedural bylaw training annually, and staff code of conduct training annually. And some of these proposed training scenarios could be combined training scenarios, either with council and staff together or independently. Obviously, the staff involvement in, for example, procurement, we do regular procurement training with staff, and it may be more prudent that staff have more regular and diligent in-depth training, as they're the ones responsible for the oversight together with our procurement office for their specific projects that they are procuring for. And the last recommendation regarding council and staff, coincidentally, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs has recently launched the government consultation on how to strengthen accountability for municipal council members with respect to code of conducts. The purpose of this consultation is to ensure that councillors and heads of council maintain a safe and respectful workplace and carry out their duties as elected officials ethically and responsibly. The recommendation report from the Associate Chief Justice contains 56 recommendations specifically pertaining to code of conduct. And Collingwood is well positioned to consult on this issue. The ministry, though, is only looking for one council representative to participate on the consultation on behalf of council. And that date is May 18th, 2021. As council has delegated Mayor Saunderson, Deputy Mayor Hall to act on the town's behalf as spokesperson regarding the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry advocacy, staff feel it is appropriate that they represent the town during consultation. And as they're recommending one individual, we recommend that Mayor Saunderson be appointed as council's representative, and Deputy Mayor Hall, should Mayor Saunderson not be able to attend on that date. Our next category was looking at business and lobbying. So procurement includes bidder, supplier ethics and responsibilities, lobbyist registry, integrity commissioner, fairness monitor practices. The Judicial Inquiry report included recommendations pertaining to businesses and lobbying activities that equate to 43% of the actions that are identified in the report, 28% being procurement, 12% being lobbying, and 3% being solicitor or integrity commissioner or consultant related. The current procurement bylaw has been in place for 4 years, and staff have identified a number of items in addition to the CJI recommendations that are being examined. Once the manager of accountability, procurement, risk management's position has been filled, staff will have the capacity to undertake the full research and review that policies, some of those policies will require. So the recommendations, A is council support staff in completing the necessary review and development or revisions to the following policies or bylaws. And we're recommending not later than March 2022 for both procurement and lobbying, and B, that council support the proposed training again for these various policies. Knowing the lobbyist registry training does have a lot of options for interpretation. We're requesting that council support an annual training program for all council and staff, applicable staff. training for procurement, again, for council members and procurement for staff. So as indicated earlier, we believe that council would probably be satisfied with training for once a term, with council should be once every 3 years, and we may be looking at even more than the 2 or 3 years as proposed. Next steps with regards to the category of OPP and legal action. So again, council needs to determine the merits, costs, and risks associated with pursuing any further legal action against various specified parties, identified in the inquiry. As an initial step, council has requested the CAO complete an initial review of the records held by EPCOR in accordance with the terms of the purchase and sale agreement from the sale of the former hydro utility. And this is on the agenda today, so it doesn't necessarily have to be voted on. These matters do require an in-camera review as they pertain to potential litigation strategies and receiving advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege or communications that are necessary for that purpose. Our next slide, next steps on the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry process. Cost control is a significant current concern with respect to the inquiry proceedings. Although our Commission Counsel felt the outcome of the inquiry and the report was quite successful, Mr. Will McDowell stated that cost was the biggest regret. However, it was required because of the complexities of the issue, and there was no way that Council could have understand the depth and scope of the items that came out within the inquiry. Judicial inquiries are a way for governments to examine issues and problems outside of the regular legislative processes, and they can help communities to benefit from an independent, neutral consideration of matters in the public domain. So staff have identified a number of areas that we believe should be considered, requesting the province to consider a review of the judicial inquiry system to ensure fair and efficient and cost-effective process, including consideration of these following items. And we've identified 5 different areas, including the Commission be required to provide an independent assessment officer to review applicable submitted charges / expenses for recovery pertaining to the inquiry. Upon initial review of scope, collection of documents, and ruling on the participation and funding, that the Commission provide a cost estimate, including proportionality and timelines of proceedings to Council for information, and that Council be given an opportunity to further scope the terms of reference and potentially cease further action should that be desirable. Also ensure that all legal counsel retained at the expense of the municipality be required to provide detailed invoicing that is posted publicly and not subject to provisions of MFIPA or any other confidentiality restrictions for full disclosure. Increase the use of affidavits and other mechanisms used in the public inquiry process to assist in limiting costs, and ensure when judicial inquiry findings are identified for provincial action that the province be required to review and take appropriate consideration of the recommendations within 2 years and be accountable to report back to the initiating municipality and AMO on their progress. Next slide. We've also identified a number of items that we would consider recommending to other municipalities that are contemplating a judicial inquiry process themselves. These items include providing as much notice in advance of Council's consideration to proceed with a judicial inquiry to ensure that the public is fully aware of the concerns, benefits, and costs, to not underestimate the importance of taking action on a matter that may have eroded or continues to erode public trust and could assist with changing the culture of the municipality and rebuilding confidence in local government, ensuring parties involved are held accountable. Establishing an appropriate scoped terms of reference. Track all costs associated with the inquiry. Expect unanticipated costs for matters that may be interdependent or complementary to the primary scope that were unknown. If matters warrant a judicial inquiry, explore the option of utilizing the judicial inquiry process early on to ensure knowledge of events and information is not diminished, lost, or destroyed, and being aware of the document management, facility, technical, and administrative costs that are associated with a judicial inquiry undertaking. And our last slide falls under the other category. So really, they should be identified as optional. They're recommendations that were received through the public consultation. Should council wish to proceed, the one recommendation was ensuring that the struggles and legacy of the inquiry, removing the plaque that is represented within both the Centennial Aquatic Center and the Central Park Arena, be removed and replaced with a simplified plaque. And the other one was to prepare a policy to include for the ability to revoke or rescind an Order of Collingwood award for criminal or unethical conduct. And that is the last. So either myself or CAO Skinner can assist with any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. What I'll do is get the recommendation on the floor, and then I will open up for questions or comments from council. You have your hand up, Sarah.
My apologies. Sorry, we should go to the public. There is individuals wishing to speak.
Yes. Yeah.
So again, if anybody from the public wishes to address council, please press the raise your hand feature. If you're on a telephone, please press *9. All right, we have someone wishing to speak. A couple individuals via telephone. So we will allow them to talk. And again, please state your name to begin addressing council.
Yes, good afternoon. It's Matt Preddy here in town of Collingwood. I was listening to the summary there, and yeah, I guess the main issue with the administration and work done through consultancy, and this is why we learn more about why consultants are valuable, but at the same time, that vetting process with people who are consulting, there is a vetting process with that. So one of the aspects, according to the newspaper, was, you know, were there enough tendered contracts going out to different companies, such as the build of Central Park, the pool, you know, these kinds of things. Was there an interest for a multi-use center, the recreation center years ago, and that was considered too expensive. They went with the locations at Centennial Park. They went with the location at Central Park Arena, which in my opinion was a good move to update those buildings and those parks. But at the end of the day, that's why the visioning process, having concepts of consultancy and plans in place so that it's not seen as only having one option. That concept, you know, that's what rattles the public all the time. Only one option. You only have one choice. Well, that's not what taxpayers want. That's not what the people of Collingwood want. They want to have choices. And we got to make sure that the next administration is providing those choices. And that's the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Sarah, who's next?
Thank you. Again, by telephone, so you should be unmuted. If not, press *6.
Hello?
Hello, Mayor Saunderson. It's Tim Fryer.
Mr. Fryer, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, Deputy Mayor Hull, and members of the council for an opportunity to address you. I just wanted to first take a moment to clarify something about the staff report. I'm still uncertain as to why I'm the only member of the contributing public specifically identified in this report. Whatever the reason for this is, in my opinion, it may appear that I have been more of a direct participant with staff deliberations on the matter of the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry next steps. I wanted just to clarify that that has not been the case. I will also state, though, that I do continue to offer my assistance, as I have previously, going back even before the Epcor sale closing, if council and or staff would like. Although this latest report doesn't specify about the topic of waterworks related research that was outlined about to council on April the 19th, if there is outstanding review required about the Collingwood Public Utilities, my background could be helpful to staff in their efforts. My only other short comment is on something that I find disconcerting when I read about the archive files or read about the archive files and go through the rest of the detail in the report. We know from Mr. Breeden's earlier summarization that of the approximately 440,000 files submitted to the Commissioner, 90% of those were Collingwood's. Although there was no indication based on my review of many of the data files, it is highly likely that the vast majority of the 40,000 supplied by other parties would have been submitted by Collis Powerstream. That being the case, I wanted to reflect on the answer provided to question number 9, which indicates that the over $300,000 cost for forensic audit services didn't duplicate any of the controllable expense for Collingwood's legal team. Since the recommendation is for in-camera discussions pertaining to this, I will simply ask at this time, wouldn't there be a risk that duplication may happen now? Hopefully there already has been some sort of review of the extensive and expensive forensic work to date to mitigate this risk. Perhaps the external auditors for both parties, Baker Tilly, is already providing assistance in that regard. Again, though, I would reaffirm that if I could also be of assistance towards any aspect of this, I would try to accommodate. In closing, I believe for full transparency that since my comments are already identified in the staff report, I will add that questions 1 through 10 in the report are mine. For the most part, these are resulting from the information in the frequently asked questions and the answers provided to others as well. Any further clarifications will be provided to Council when required. Once again, I appreciate the opportunity to provide these comments to Council and staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fryer. Sarah, do we have some other participants from the gallery?
Your Worship, we're just looking here. Again, press the raise your hand feature if you wish to address Council regarding this matter. And it doesn't look like any further public participation regarding this report.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So I'll read the recommendation and I'll look for a mover and a seconder. That staff report CAO 2021-5 entitled CJI Next Steps Following Public Consultation be received. And further, that Council hear and approve next steps as recommended herein. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Hamlin. Seconder to get it on the floor. Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor McLeod, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a few questions and I have some comments as well on this report. My first question through you, Mr. Mayor, is on page 6 of the report, which is page 40 in the agenda. The quote is, "Following discussion with agencies and associations." And my question is, which agencies and associations are being discussed with?
Who would like to take that? Sarah? You're on mute.
Thank you, Worship. Sorry, on page 6.
Yes.
So those specifically relate actually to the ones identified in the presentation. So agencies and associations that we've spoken to primarily include AMO, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Simcoe County Clerks and Treasurers, and then Mayor Saunderson, I believe Deputy Mayor Hall and CAO Skinner have had other consultations with various agencies or individuals.
Excellent, thank you. On page 9 of the report, which is page 43 of our agenda, the quotation is, "The OPP have not committed to any timelines." And I believe through you, Mr. Mayor, to our CAO, there was a meeting earlier this year wherein we were told that the OPP had informed us that there would be something said by March the 15th. Am I remembering that correctly?
CAO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor McLeod. I can't recall exactly what the date was, but there was an earlier commitment to something coming forward. I did get a chance to talk to the OPP as recently as today. However, And they now have no commitment to a date. So I think it's no current commitment at this time to response from the OPP. Thank you for asking to clarify.
Thank you. My next question is about page 11 of the report, where it is recommended that we make a request of the province and we make recommendations to other municipalities when it comes to judicial inquiries. And I'm curious to know what form that request and those recommendations might take. What's the suggestion being made? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
I can speak.
Yeah, go ahead, Clerk.
Certainly. I can speak first, and then CEO Skinner can follow up. So initially, obviously written responses, and as we had contemplated in our original report regarding the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry, is potentially, work with, potential universities, as well as attending various conferences. We know that there hasn't been very many municipalities across the province that have undertaken them, generally, including whenever staff had originally been aware, had sought information from those municipalities. And, this recommendation is being actually very general in nature, but it could encompass, a broad range of items.
Okay, thank you. On February 16th, which was 10 weeks ago, we here at Council directed staff to put out an RFP for an integrity commissioner, a lobbyist registrar, and a fairness monitor. And I'm curious to know where that process sits at this moment.
Certainly, I can address that as well, Your Worship.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the RFP has been issued. So because of the complexity of the requirements of Fairness Monitor, we put it out as the Fairness Monitor and the Integrity and Lobbyist Registry could provide a joint submission, because there's limited firms or companies or individuals that provide a complete package. Actually, there was only 2 that we specifically identified. So we thought, to ensure that we got the best submissions, we have them separated. The bid closes later this month, and we continue to work with Principals Integrity until the effective date, once the award and contracts have been executed, as of June the 15th. So within a month and a week or so.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, concerning the appendix to this report, and this goes back to what was just said by Mr. Fryer in the public response part of this meeting. When a person addresses a committee or a council meeting, back in the days when we still were in person, there was a form that they had to write their name on and give their address. And now they're required to identify themselves publicly in this meeting. I'm curious to know why that's not required in our online forums, and what type of comment would be prohibited. For example, there are some comments included in the appendix which are in caps, and I wonder if, if they included vulgar language, would they be eliminated, or would that language be redacted? I'm just curious to know why it is that names are not required to be attached to comments that are included in a staff report.
Comments?
I can briefly address that. I can't recall exactly how this was set up. Some of the Engage requires registration, so the information names do have to be provided, and sometimes it is left open to ensure the most efficient opportunity for comment. I believe we did have names associated with it. If there was something that was extremely sensitive and we felt should be removed, I believe that staff have that capacity to make that decision. Again, we would apply similar principles to what we utilize for items that we put on a consent agenda, for example.
Okay, thank you. And so through you, Mr. Mayor, my comments are that as far as I can tell, There are 10 recommendations contained in this report. That staff review a bunch of bylaws, that council support certain trainings for staff and council, that the mayor and deputy mayor attend the provincial consultations on the codes of conduct, that staff review a bunch of other bylaws, that council support certain other trainings for staff and council, that we go in camera to talk about what's in the EPCOR papers, that we talk to the province about judicial inquiries, that we warn other municipalities about about judicial inquiries, that we replace the plaques at the two buildings, recreation facilities, and that we develop a policy to possibly take away the Order of Collingwood. Now, according to the pending list that was provided on April 12th, we are already reviewing the Order of Collingwood. It is item 97 on the list. We are already reviewing the codes of conduct. That is item 120 on the pending list that was provided on April the 12th. Council asked for an RFP process for an integrity commissioner and a lobbyist registrar on February 16th. And as you've heard from the clerk just now, that process is well along the way. The review of the lobbyist registry is listed as item 81 on our pending list, which was provided to council on April the 12th. And a review of the bylaws is listed as number 281 on our pending list, which was provided on April the 12th. So that's 5 out of the 10 recommendations pretty much covered. And anybody, by the way, I inform this council and anyone listening to this meeting can provide feedback on the consultations with the province regarding municipal codes of conduct. They are open online. It is a survey until July the 15th. I highly recommend that you do so. So that's another one off the list of recommendations provided in this report. Replacing the plaques just seems petty and small, and our in-camera agenda shows we're already talking about litigation. So that leaves the EPCOR papers and what's in them. Now, people who lived here at the time will remember that there were rumors that Mayor Sandra Cooper's brother, Paul Bonwick, profited from the sale of half of Collis to Powerstream, and that rumor was proven to be true. The information is in the judicial inquiry on page 10 of volume 1, and it is detailed elsewhere. There was a rumor back in the day that Mayor Sandra Cooper's brother, Paul Bonwick, profited from the construction of the coverings for the pool and the new ice rink. And that rumor was proven to be true in the judicial inquiry on page 13 of volume 1, and it was detailed elsewhere. The rumor was that Mayor Sandra Cooper and Deputy Mayor Rick Lloyd fired the CAO, so Paul Bonwick's and Rick Lloyd's close friend Ed Houghton could be made CAO. That rumor was proven to be true by the judicial inquiry on page 10 of volume 1, and it was detailed elsewhere in the report. And the rumor was that the outcome of the deal to sell half of Collis to Powerstream was designed by acting CAO Ed Houghton to come, or CAO Ed Houghton to come to the outcome that it came to, long before the sale was even contemplated by the council at the time or the public. That rumor was proven to be true by the judicial inquiry, as stated on page 9 of volume 1 and detailed elsewhere in the report. So the rumor now regarding the EPCOR papers is that a lot of money paid by the people of Collingwood for their water and wastewater and electricity was handed out to people in town, members of the CPUSB, possibly staff, through irregular bonuses, overly generous per diems, double dipping, amazingly generous expense accounts and other means. And we can find out for sure if we spend a whole bunch more money to go through the EPCOR papers. But do we really need to? I think we know enough. I give you leave to believe anything you want about what's in the EPCOR papers because all the rumors heretofore have been proven to be true. And we have a whole bunch of new troubles at our door right now, which can be traced directly back to some of the people who were involved at the time that the judicial inquiry's events took place. We are in a big jam and we have to find a way out of it. And I think we already know enough about the past to move forward with our eyes open. And therefore I move that we only receive this report and not fulfill its recommendations. And I'm going to need a seconder for that.
Yeah, so I think, Councillor, that could be either an amendment or you could simply sever and just do the receive portion.
I'll make that as an amendment, please.
Okay, so we got the amendment then, and it's moved by yourself, and I didn't catch the seconder. Councillor Berman, okay. So the amendment is on the floor, but I will leave comments open to council. Any other questions or comments? I've got Councillor Comey and then Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor McLeod, for your passionate comments there and your detailed research. I was going to ask prior to this amendment that we sever off the other recommendations, which were the plaque removal and the order of Collingwood. And I see that it was just a single resident that recommended that those plaques come down. And it got me thinking along the same lines as Councillor McLeod, that from day one, we've been asked to be all about putting plaques up and not taking them down. We've had 3 Parks and Rec capital projects in front of us since the day we took our seats in need of a new plaque. Fisher Field, the splash pad, the Sunset Point playground. And what I was hoping to hear over the time I've been sitting here is that we got these plaques on order and we can't wait to put up new plaques. This should be the message our community and our staff are hearing from us, that we are looking forward to new projects. And when I saw this, all I could think was that a council committed to the future cannot be one stuck and unwilling to move on from the past. And those are my comments in particular with regard to the plaque removal.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I would also like to thank Councillor McLeod for her detailed analysis of the work that we already have in place as a result, as a follow-up of the judicial inquiry. And this is not to trivialize or diminish the efforts that staff have taken to findings of the judicial inquiry and to ensure that our side of the street as a municipality is clean. But I also note that of the 26 recommendations that were received from members of the public, 16 of them had to do with cost or cost containment or cost budgeting or cost transparency. And I just believe that we have come to the point of diminishing returns. And we do have important matters and serious matters and matters that are going to occupy the attention and the time of our staff. And it is more important now for us to be pursuing those matters than to be living in the past. And so I would be very supportive of the amendment to the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. So any comments or questions on the amendment? Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I was going to ask that if you were entertaining questions on the entire thing or if just specific to the amendment, so I'll wait.
Well, if you want to ask on, because once I call the vote on the amendment, if it passes, it will shut the door on the discussion. So go ahead if you have questions now on the entire report.
Sure, thank you. So my one question is that some of the input we gave with respect to the JI was, from our experience, was the necessity of having a safe whistleblower policy going forward so that staff can feel safe in bringing forward information that our head of staff and council need to know. Is that reflected in any of the next steps as outlined by Councillor McLeod that were already included in our other steps? And that'll be
yes. Clerk Columnist, go ahead.
Certainly, through your worship to Councillor Jeffrey, one of the recommendations for the policies that were identified is a workplace harassment policy. And I believe that's something that we're still currently identifying and finalizing at this point. Would be included in that. It's also a potential that could be added to the provincial consultation items, but it's definitely something that is part of our policy development that we're pursuing.
Thank you. And I was just wondering, Mayor Saunderson, with respect to our comments on recommendations for municipalities going forward and considering judicial inquiries, that we might want to qualify our list that it may be, but not limited to, depending on their experience. I wouldn't want to be assuming liability for them, thinking we had given them everything and there was something else they should have considered.
It's duly noted.
That's it.
CEO Skinner, you had your card up? Go ahead, yep.
Sorry, I think I had a momentary blip there. Thank you, Your Worship. And I did also want to say via you to Councillor Jeffrey that we do have a policy on workplace violence and harassment that comes through the requirements of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And it's a very important policy to me, and I think to all the senior leadership team. And we have a commitment to move forward on making sure that there is a safe and clear whistleblower policy for staff in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Councillor Jeffrey?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Berman, and then Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Two very anticlimactic clarifications on the staff report, if I may.
Go ahead. Yeah.
On page 6, let me open that. It talks about there appears to be little capacity at this time, blah, 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 to go on with the CJI recommendations, but it gives reasons, and it says in part of competing priorities, which I get, the COVID pandemic, and then it says in the lead up to the provincial election. And I was just wondering why that would be a factor as far as the capacity to do anything, through you to whoever.
Thomas?
Certainly, I can address that. So in speaking with both AMO, I believe, and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, COVID has put their priorities on, different items within their organization. I know at one point, the policing was a particular interest for some of them. They also indicated that, there's not as much opportunity to change priorities, based on the upcoming elections. And those were, specific conversations that we did have, particularly with those two organizations.
Okay, those came through AMO. I'm sorry, through Mayor Saunderson to you.
AMO and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, the housing representatives that we spoke to.
Okay, but nothing, just so I'm clear, it's nothing to do with the municipality having anything to do with the upcoming provincial election.
No,
okay.
No.
And then my second question is top of page 11 on the report. It says that the pandemic also caused unanticipated delays and associated costs with the inquiry. So again, just a clarification that the public element of the inquiry ended on December 5th of 2019, but Ontario didn't declare a pandemic until January of 2020. So if you can, a little clarification on how the pandemic caused unanticipated costs and delays.
Certainly through your worship to Councillor Berman. This was actually directly from Will McDowell's comments provided to council. And again, the clarification results in the delay in the report being undertaken, and they seconded a full staff member for that complete additional time period until the report was issued. As well as any other assistance that they had to retain to help finish the final report.
Oh, okay. As long as I know I can reference that in Will's report. Okay, that was all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am in agreement with Councillor McLeod's amendment, except for one small point that I'll come to in a second. I would say I have not heard one resident say they wish that we would spend more time, more money, or more effort on the outcome of the judicial inquiry. And I wholly agree with the comments of Councillor Doherty that our municipality has so many important things to be dealing with right now. The one thing, though, that I do feel I would wish would happen, and I think it could be done by way of a letter, perhaps from the mayor or one of our staff, but it's the recommendation on page 11. And this goes to something I've commented on a few times, which is why it's top of mind for me. And that is that the judicial inquiry process that the legislation allows municipalities to undertake is wanting. It is, you know, and in terms, and the recommendation here is to tighten it up and to give tools to allow municipalities to know specifically what kind of costs they're going to incur if they get into a judicial inquiry and what kind of timing and so on. So as I say, and I look to you, Mr. Mayor, for your advice on how I manage if this is an amendment to the amendment or whatever, but I would so love that particular recommendation get forwarded to the province.
We don't have amendments to amendments, so I think staff has noted the comment, and you know, the dialogue with the province is ongoing on a number of fronts, and so I'm quite happy to push that message forward. It's been on the table in discussion, so we will continue with that messaging.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, and then I'll call the vote on the amendment, which is to receive this report. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to item 6.2, C 2021-8, Alternative Voting Methods, 2022 Municipal Election. And I will pass it over to Clerk Almus.
Thank you, Your Worship. We do have a very brief presentation regarding our alternative voting methods for the 2022 municipal election. So if we go to our first slide. So there has been updates to the Municipal Elections Act through Bill 218, supporting Ontario's recovery and Municipal Elections Act 2020 received royal assent on November the 20th, 2020, introducing a series of significant changes to Municipal Elections Act in light of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, including nomination day being moved from the 4th Friday in July to the 3rd Friday in August, timeline for passing a bylaw authorizing the voting method be moved from May 1st, the year before an election, to May 2nd, so May 1st, the year of an election. Timeline to establish election procedures moved from December 31st in the year before the election to before June 1st in the election year, and rank ballot voting has been eliminated. I shall note the day after Bill 218 was passed, a private member's bill was introduced to reintroduce the option of ranked ballots based on a number of criteria. However, it has not received, since it's been introduced, it remains in first reading. So again, that was in November 2020, and it has not moved past first reading. Next slide, alternative voting methods. So alternative voting methods, the Municipal Election Act provides municipalities to use these different methods in lieu of traditional polling stations, and paper ballots can provide enhanced accountability to voters when casting a ballot, decrease counting errors through manual counting of ballots, increase efficiencies, and reintroduce time it takes to calculate election results. Preparing for the 2022 municipal election and school board elections, the focus on this report is to review the various alternative voting methods that are available and determine the best fit for Collingwood following a public consultation process. So our next slide. So these are the principles that must be adhered to for every municipal election. So that is maintaining the secrecy and confidentiality of the voting process and individual votes, providing an election that is accessible to the voters, providing an election that is fair and non-biased, ensuring the integrity of the process is maintained throughout the election, ensuring the results of the election reflect the votes cast and that valid votes be counted and invalid votes be rejected so far as reasonably possible, and ensuring that voters and candidates are treated fairly and consistently within the municipality. Our next slide. So the purpose of this report is to generally go over the various voting methods. So these are the various types that Coordinator of Clerk Services, Chris Sargent, will explain for members of council and the public. So next slide.
Thank you very much, Clerk Almus. So I've identified a number of different voting methods in the report, and I'll briefly touch on how each of them works and our rough estimate of cost for each one. So the very first one would be paper ballots with a hand count. That should be very familiar to most people. That's the method used in both provincial and federal elections. So that would involve sending a voter information card to all eligible electors based on the MPAC list. Prior to the election, that would identify locations, polling stations for them, and ID requirements for voting. On the voting day, they would show up at one of the election stations, either on voting day or during one of the advanced polling dates, mark a ballot, drop it into a ballot box. Those ballot boxes would then be collated at a central location once the poll is closed, and they would be counted by volunteers or part-time staff. The approximate cost for that, we're thinking, is about $3.50 per elector, but of course, that needs to take into consideration that staffing costs can increase based on the number of volunteers that would be involved. Another alternative is paper ballots with a tabulator or an optical scan tabulator. It's very similar to an in-person election with hand-counted ballots, except that rather than dropping a ballot into a ballot box, electors would put it into a tabulator, which would read the results and store them on an internal memory card. Those memory cards would be kept securely, and then once the election poll is closed, they would be brought to a central location and electronically collated, and the results would be available relatively soon after the close of polls. And that would be a little bit more expensive and be about $5 per elector. Vote by mail is another alternative. Again, quite familiar to residents of Collingwood. This was the method that was chosen in 2010 and 2014. That would involve sending a direct mail to each eligible elector from MPAC's list that includes a ballot kit, that includes a secrecy envelope, the actual ballot, and a prepaid return envelope. At their leisure, residents would mark their ballot, place it into the secrecy envelope, and then put it into the prepaid return envelope and mail it back to the election center. Those would be kept securely until the polls close. Once those polls close, they would be unsealed and run through a tabulator, and the results would be made available once those have been collated. So the approximate cost of that would be about $4.67 per elector. And I should add that for our estimates of total cost that you see in the report, we were estimating approximately 20,000 electors coming up in the 2022 election. For internet voting, this was the methodology that was used in 2018. So it would be, again, a little bit familiar to everybody, but that would involve sending a voter letter to each individual elector. On that letter would be a voter ID, a unique PIN, and the URL they'd use to vote. Anytime during the voting period, they would be able to log in using that URL on a device, be it a smartphone, a laptop, or a tablet, use their login information in a security question, which has been in the past a date of birth. They would then be able to select each of their preferred candidates from each of the races. The benefit there being that there would be no inadvertent spoiling ballots because they cannot under or overvote. They would then digitally submit their ballot and have their name digitally removed from the voters list. Those results would be stored on an electronic server that would be inaccessible until the voting period closes. And then again, once those polls close, we'd be able to access the results almost immediately after the polling closes. And the approximate cost of that would be about $3.12 per elector. Telephone voting is the one methodology that we looked at that we're not actually recommending. We used it again in 2018 as an alternative for accessibility purposes. I'll go through how it works and then discuss why we're not suggesting it come forwards again in 2022. So for telephone voting, again, it would be very similar to the internet voting. They use the same platform and software. Each individual will be sent that voter letter, which would include a unique ID and PIN, as well as the telephone number they would use to vote. Then during the voting period, they would call into that telephone number and use their login information, and they'd listen to audio prompts for each of the races. They would select their preferred candidates. And then again, that information, that ballot would be cast digitally and stored on an electronic server, which would not be accessible until after the election. The issues we encountered in 2018 were that there were a lot of individual candidates on the ballot, so that many of the audio prompts took a long time to read through. The calls were quite lengthy. There are also common issues with calls being dropped and timeouts and things like that. And for those purposes, we think that there are other methodologies that could be useful for accessibility purposes. In terms of cost, this is essentially identical to internet voting from a software capability. We are expecting it to be about $3.12 again. The final one we wanted to speak about was touchscreen voting. This kind of combines some of the qualities of internet voting and in-person voting, sort of the benefits of each of them, but of course comes at an increased cost. So touchscreen voting is the methodology that's currently employed by the city of Barrie. So on voting day or prior to voting day, each eligible elector would be sent a voter card informing them of a voting station, just like an in-person vote. Just like an in-person vote, they would show up on either an advanced voting day or on voting day and go to an individual polling station. There would be an electronic kiosk set up for each of them. And from that, they would be able to access the races using a touchscreen feature that would allow them to walk through. Again, like internet voting, there would be no issue of under or over voting because they'd be able to select only their candidates. However, rather than submitting that ballot electronically, it would actually print off a physical ballot for the individual elector to review. And they would then feed that through a tabulator, which would electronically store that final ballot on a memory card, which would then be, once the polls were closed, brought to a central location and collated. Again, as I said, that's a little bit more expensive than others due to the cost of renting that kiosks for each individual polling site. So that would be about $5.75 per elector and is the most expensive methodology that we looked at. And that's it for me. And I'll turn it back over to Clerk Almus for some concluding comments.
Thank you, Chris. So the final comment is with respect to moving forward. There's some municipalities that are starting to identify their voting methods. We want to make sure that we get out to our community, that we solicit some public feedback. Some municipalities have chosen to pick their method versus engaging the public in the discussion. In accordance with our community-based strategic plan, we think that this is a priority. One of the biggest ways to enfranchise your constituents is through voting. So we want to make sure that we give the public this opportunity. So we will be setting up a detailed Engage Collingwood site. The information on the site will include these various voting methods. It will also include the detailed list of pros and cons that have been identified through our Clerks Association, as well as a cost per elector, to again provide unbiased information, and the public can share their comments and feedback to council through the report that we'll be providing and presenting back to SIC on July the 5th. And that is it for our presentation today.
Thank you, Sarah. Is there anyone from the gallery that would like to comment on this presentation?
Yes, Your Worship. We have an individual on the telephone that wishes to address council. We'll allow him to speak.
Hello, go ahead.
Yes, it's me again, Matt Preddy, Town of Collingwood. Just thinking about this, what advantages would candidates have in these voting? Is it more the advantage of the collection, the processing of the data that you would eliminate, you know, such as this phone-in voting, you know, the prompts or whatever that's called is too belabored, you know, it's not as fast. Is there a way, like, you know, the new QR code insignias, like on, you know, if you're running for the position of council, the QR codes, is that something, would that be a value added, like, you know, even with the town in the newspaper, all this kind of thing, that's like an app? Like what that does is it preps you to an app that brings you up to the town website. Is that something that could be used more to help the public relate with specific web address, you know, the digital address? Is that something the bylaw office is considering? Thank you.
Clerk Almus.
Certainly, Your Worship. So that is with regards to sharing candidate information and information regarding our election. So definitely when it gets close to the election time, staff can explore various initiatives or options or mechanisms to enhance that experience to residents using QR codes or other methods to ensure that people can easily access the information on voting and candidates that we'll have.
Thank you for that. Anyone else from the gallery that would like to speak to this?
No, there isn't, Your Worship.
All right, then I'll read the motion, the resolution in. That staff report C 2021-8 alternative voting methods -2022 municipal election be received, and that staff be directed to begin public consultation regarding alternative voting methods for the 2022 municipal election, with a report to come back to the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee on July 5, 2021. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Comey, seconded by Councillor Berman. Any questions or comments, Council? Councillor Comey, and then Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To you, to Clerk Almus. Well, first of all, what a great opportunity to thank you and Becky and all of the staff that was so helpful during the last election, in particular with the internet voting. I think that everyone did an outstanding job taking the iPads where they needed to be for particularly our seniors that didn't all have access to computers. And I just have a couple of thoughts to share in terms of thinking ahead to this going on Engage Collingwood. I do hope that internet voting is separated from telephone voting, because I also heard the same about the telephone voting. So I'm concerned if it goes on Engage and it's like, do you like internet/telephone voting? People will be like, no, I don't. I would have liked to see some assessment of the sustainability options between all of them. So obviously using potentially 20,000 paper ballots versus the option of being online only. And as well, I'd like to offer the comment, I hope we're going to engage with our accessibility committee, because again, anything that's going to force somebody to a polling station versus in the age of COVID and what we're doing right now, living our best life here over Wi-Fi is probably going to be of much more interest and less hesitation than we saw when we first rolled it out. So without question, I'm hugely in favor of the online voting. I think if the clerk services is able to offer the same level of exceptional customer service that they did with the last election, I don't see any concerns. And those are my comments.
Thank you. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I just have one question. And I guess perhaps, well, anyway, we'll see who can answer this. As I understood option 1 for voting, that's paper ballots. We all know how that works. And the second one with the optical scanner tabulator is the only difference using the scanner to tabulate the votes? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Sarah?
That is correct.
So as a follow-up, can we use that, because I noticed the cost is $1.50 a vote or more for the second option. And if this was an option that was chosen, would we be able to use the tabulator, the same tabulators in a following election?
Sorry, through your worship, tabulators are a rented piece of equipment. They are quite expensive. I know there has been the city of Barrie at one point had purchased all their tabulators, and I know that they encountered difficulty in future elections regarding that.
Okay, that's great. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, council? Seeing none, I'll call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. That brings us to item 6.3. The T2021-5 2021 fees and charges amendment. And I think Treasurer Quinlan's going to be presenting that for us. You're on mute, Monica. No, I think we ran into this last time. No.
How about now?
Ah, we've got you now.
There we go. It seems to pick up 3 different microphones on my computer, so I apologize for that.
No, not a problem.
So thank you, Your Worship, and through you. This is sort of short and sweet. There are 3 fees that are on today's report and are change, or let me rephrase that, 3 changes that we've included in today's report, 2 of which, both the parking and planning fees, have been brought through previous standing committee meetings and received and approved from council. The only exception is the 2% convenience fee that we're proposing. And the idea behind this is to offset credit card fees associated with payments on property taxes only. As council may be aware, merchants are charged fees on credit card payments, and sometimes this can be quite expensive. And in the past, we have not accepted credit cards as payment for taxes. However, since bringing on our virtual town hall online payment system, we have recently accepted credit card payments and are seeking a 2% convenience fee to help offset those expenses and make it fair and equitable to all taxpayers. And that's it.
All right, thank you. Sarah, is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on this? You're on mute too. It's just catching.
Sorry. Yes, sorry. Your Worship, no, there is nobody wishing to speak to council or committee on this matter at this time.
All right, then I'll get this item on the floor. And the resolution reads, staff report T 2021-5 2021 fees and charges amendment be received, and the council enact and pass a bylaw to amend the fees and service charges as identified in Appendix A of the report. And I get a mover and a seconder for that, please. Councillor Berman, Councillor Jeffrey. Council comments or questions? Councillor Komi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I'm not in support of paid parking, I'm asking if we could please sever just so there's 3 items, the A1, the E1, and the G2. Could we please sever off G2 to vote separately?
Yes, so we'll sever the parking and deal with the first 2 issues first, the first
Thank
fee
you.
changes. Any questions or comments, council? Seeing none, then I'm calling the vote on all but the parking fee changes. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. And then secondly, or lastly, dealing with the parking fee changes. All in favor? And opposed? Duly noted. And that brings us to item 6.4, T 2021-6, asset management plan status. And I think Treasurer Quinlan, you're up again.
I am, thank you, Your Worship. And I think there's a presentation that we're going to pull up here. Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship, and through you again. Staff have brought this report forward just to update everyone on the status of the current asset management plan. And if I can just ask you for the next slide. Part of the understanding of this relates back to the latest in the regulation, which was just very recently updated to change the deadline for phase 1 of this plan. It was previously July 1st of this year and has recently been moved to July of 2022. The requirements of this phase are that all core infrastructure assets are included and that level of services are defined, as well as the life cycle costs. Phase 2 is now due in July of 2023 and is expected to include all assets. And this means basically any assets that the town manages outside of infrastructure, including facilities, parks, playground equipment, and vehicles, and the like. Phase 3 deadline is now July 1st, 2024, and is expected to be a full comprehensive asset management plan that includes proposed levels of service, or what we would call targeted levels of service, a full life cycle management, and a complete financial strategy. Next slide, please.
As we work our way through the AMP, the town is following the framework that the province has laid out. This includes having a full asset inventory and understanding the age and condition of those assets, as well as the replacement value of those assets. It then moves towards understanding the current level of service and creating deterioration curves to help us predict when and how quickly our assets will decline. Next slide, please. Following this, we'll need to define the types of treatments that may alter the speed of this deterioration and then set the targeted levels of service. And the final step is then determining the most optimal set of treatments to achieve that target, basically getting the most out of our investment. And finally, this creates a multi-year financing strategy. Next slide, please. The current status of the town's AMP is shown on this slide. And for the most part, for phase one, we're well on our way. We are currently only missing the wastewater treatment and water treatment facilities condition assessments. And this was delayed from last year due to COVID-19, but is expected to be completed by the end of this summer. The plan for staff is to complete much of phase one over the next several months so that we are in a position to use the details of the AMP in our 2022 budget deliberations. And as you can see, phase two and phase three, there's quite a bit of work left to do. However, all facility condition assessments are expected to be completed by the end of the summer as well, which is a large piece of these next two phases. Next slide, please. This slide shows us the current state of our local infrastructure. And I think overall, when I look at this table, if I wanted to highlight the most important information is that it gives us an idea of what the average condition of our assets is. And overall, if you look, you can see that for the most part, we're in quite good condition. Overall, it's a 75 average. It also shows us the great amount of cost in terms of total assets that the town manages and the replacement cost of those assets. Next slide, please. This next slide, as it shows, is what the current AMP model advises is the appropriate amount of spending. And I want to reiterate that these numbers are still very preliminary. And sorry, I've skipped a slide, my apologies. The current state of our local infrastructure is in good condition. And I'm going to go back. I want to reiterate that these numbers are still very preliminary and we still have a lot of work to do to validate the details of the model. But I think it's important that we take a look at it, and we've included it because the current model is actually much closer to actual expenditures than what was previously expected. If you can see in the columns, essentially in total, it shows a net difference of just under $1 million in terms of total asset spending. Again, very preliminary data, but much different perspective than our previous AMP model had us understand. Additionally, I want to be clear that this only includes core assets at this time. Next slide, please. This next slide shows us from a historical standpoint and illustrates the total amount the town's investing in asset management, both in spending and in additions to reserve funds that are intended for asset spending. And overall, again, I think this shows that the town has made a great effort in addressing the stewardship of these assets. Most recently, the over $2 million that was earmarked by council in the 2021 budget will again assist us in ensuring the proper care of the town's valuable assets. I'll note again that the 2020 final audited statements aren't yet complete. So these numbers are estimates, although I feel are very reasonable estimates. Next slide, please. Just to summarize the data that we've reviewed, I think the AMP model estimates of what we should be spending roughly correspond to what we are in fact spending. Again, I'm going to note that this is on core assets only. Other asset categories are still being worked through. We've also found that overall, our average condition ratings of our asset classes are quite good, above 70 in most cases. And finally, that the internal reserves for asset replacement and rehabilitation are quite reasonable based on the information on the previous slide. I think in summary, what we can say is that we're doing the right things, but there's still lots of work to do to complete phase one of the asset management plan. Next slide. Our next steps. So the next steps that we've discussed throughout the report are the continued refinement and the asset condition assessment of both the water and wastewater treatment plant facilities. Again, those will be completed by the end of August 2021. We do need to move towards defining our levels of service, and staff are currently working towards just defining that current, and then we'll start to work to set targets and bring several different case studies for council's deliberation in the future. We also need to ensure that the timing of the replacement correspond with the appropriate project. So for example, if there's a roads project that's identified in 2025 and the said water mains and wastewater mains are set for 2027, we need to somehow come up with the most optimal approach to addressing the timing of those types of projects. We need to understand the deterioration and degradation of assets with respect to maintenance. And we've started that work as well, as you could see in the status of the current town's ANP. And finally, the biggest piece is developing the financial strategy that ties all of this information together. I think overall, staff have made great efforts and great strides over the last 15 months since the previous update to council. And again, the hope is that by the 2022 budget deliberations, we have quite a plan to use towards that capital planning. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Sarah, do we have anyone from the gallery that would like to comment on that presentation?
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, if there's anybody from the gallery wishing to speak, please press the raise your hand feature or *9 if you're on a telephone. And there is nobody wishing to speak to this report, Your Worship.
Thank you, Sarah. Get this on the floor. The resolution reads that the staff report TE 2021-6 asset management plan status be received for information. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Berman and Councillor Madigan. Any questions or comments, Council? Councillor McLeod.
Just a comment that the irony of this report coming to us today, 1 week after what happened last week, is not lost on me. And I'm sure it's not lost on any of my colleagues.
All right. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to our treasurer. I noticed in figure 1.2, we seemed, and I understood these numbers are very preliminary, I did read your report, that we seem to have underspent on our roads $1.1 million. I raise this because this, one of the things I hear about sometimes is how bad the state of our roads are. And I'm sure everyone in every municipality has that feeling, but because you see bad roads everywhere. But would this account for part of the problem we've had in our municipality? In your view, have we been underspending on our roads?
Treasurer Quinlan.
Thank you for your worship. It's a good question, Councillor Hamlin. I think if we look at those numbers again, we both said it is preliminary data. I guess what I go back to is the condition of our roads. And when I look at the state of our current local infrastructure, roads themselves have a PCI index of better than 80%, not quite much higher than 80%. And I think that suggests that what we're spending is appropriate. I think, again, as we dig deeper into the asset management plan, what it will help us understand better is that where we need to direct the spending more aggressively, maybe. So I think I don't necessarily agree, 100% with that statement, but I think, again, as we delve into the AMP and we get it further refined, it will highlight that information quite clearly for us.
Okay, thank you. And I have one other question. Your report indicates there will be an analysis of levels of service. And I'm just wondering, my only touchstone for level of service is in development charges, where you can't go above a level of service that you established historically, and determining what you want to collect charges for. Is that the same concept here? Are we going to be stuck with our historical levels of service, or do we have an opportunity to look at, what level of service we would like given the growth we're going to have? If that makes sense.
For you again, Your Worship. Yeah, it's a little bit different than the way the development charges are approached, but certainly members of council will have an opportunity to define that level of service. Now, when we do define it, there will be costs associated with it as well. So, the higher the level of service, obviously, generally would be at a greater cost. But things that will help us develop it are community involvement, risks with safety and cost, and then, performance standards and industry standards and things like that, so that you will have the opportunity to define what council feels is the most appropriate level of service.
Okay, thank you so much.
Council, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, then I will call the vote. All in favor? That is passed unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to item T 2021-7, COVID-19 economic relief, tax penalty and interest relief update. Treasurer Quinlan.
Thank you, Your Worship, one more time here. So as part of the February 1st SIC meeting, members of council approved the waiving of interest on current year taxes only for both March and April. And the interest foregone for that period is approximately $36,000. And at that time, staff committed to bring an update of the program if the pandemic continued and or worsened. And as council is aware, we're currently under a new stay-at-home order until May 20th. Again, because of this, many of our residents and businesses are experiencing financial pressures. So staff is bringing forward a similar program where interest is being proposed once again to be waived for both May and June, again on current year taxes only. The cost of this portion will be approximately $45,000. And again, this lost revenue is eligible to be replaced by the COVID relief top-up funding we receive from the province. However, if it's necessary for us to use that, we will bring it forward to council in the future.
Thank you. Is there anyone from the gallery that would like to address this?
No, Your Worship, there is not.
Okay, thank you. Resolution reads that staff report T 2021-7 COVID-19 economic relief, tax penalty and interest relief update be received, and that council authorize staff to waive penalty and interest charges for the months of May and June 2021 with respect to current year taxes payable only. So that is the 2021 taxes. And I need a mover and a seconder, Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Doherty. And Councillor McLeod, go ahead.
Just a point of clarification through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Treasurer. These taxes that are not being paid, these are non-residential as well as residential properties, yes? Or just residential?
That's true.
Sorry, I kept talking. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you. So these are businesses as well as personal properties. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions or comments, council? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. And this brings us to departmental updates. Do we have any departmental updates today? I'm not seeing any. Okay. Which brings us to other business. Is this dealing with departmental updates, Councillor Hamlin? Which department are you head of?
Well, I've let Director Culver know I was going to ask him specifically a question. I could ask it under other business, however.
Well, you're up now, so let's go ahead.
Okay. With respect to the donation of $100,000 for tree planting for the 2020 taxation year, I just wanted to, and I know now we're in 2021, but I understand there's an update from Director Culver as to a program that's going to be unfolding this year.
Director Culver.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank Councillor Hamlin. So in response to the question regarding an update of the donor program, we have a plan that will be rolled out imminently, whereby residents of the town of Collingwood will be offered the opportunity to plant trees in their backyard, resulting from a public program supported by the donation. So in a nutshell, and there's lots of details here that I won't waste a lot of time with, but effectively up to $150, the donation will support 50% of the purchase cost of a new tree to be planted in the backyard under some specific criteria, including that it's a native tree and that it's located and the information that we provide is followed so that the tree remains healthy and provides another component of our community's tree canopy. There's a lot of information that will be imparted to applicants. It will be done through an online process with some non-technical support if an individual needs that. But the method we're using our city view system will allow it to us to do geomapping of the plants, of the tree plant, and that it will allow us to see the canopy grow in these private spaces. So we're really excited. We're kind of labeling this a canopy program for Collingwood, and as mentioned, some information will be heading out imminently to let the community know how to apply and help us to get trees in the ground all over the place.
Thank you for that. So will the report be coming through the Operations and Development Committee, or how's this going to, how will the information be sent out to the public?
Thank you, Mayor. We're actually following the mandate provided by council when they supported the donation. So there won't be any report coming. It'll be a public process that heads out, broadcast widely. It represents a $50,000 portion of the donation, and it means that up to 330, I think up to 333 trees might be available depending on the public response. And we also plan on running it annually, or even biannually, depending on how each session, with the uptake of each session. So yeah, it should be proceeding soon.
Good, very good to hear. All right, that brings us to item 8 under other business, and 8.1, we have the Collingwood Downtown BIA Budget 2021, and Sue Nicholson, the General Manager, is here. So we bring Sue on board, please. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you very much. Can you, oh, there I am. I seem to be in 2 different places. I apologize. Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. And you have it's been a very interesting meeting. I've been sitting and listening, and you have a full agenda for sure. So I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I will talk briefly about the work that the BIA does and our budget for the coming year, as well as a brief recap of last year. Thanks to Clerk Almas. You can go to the next slide, sorry. We worked very hard this last year in redeveloping our committee structure and our board structure. We had 4 new members join us, some brand new, some I call them recycled, but board members that had been on the BIA board before. So this was our previous board structure. If you go to the next slide, you'll see our new advisory committee structure, where there are 4 main advisory committees that have been struck. They include at least 2, sometimes 3 of our board directors, as well as up to 2 members of the public, as well as 3 to 5 BIA members. And although we're still looking for volunteers for our improvement and maintenance committee, our promotion committee is quite active, as is our beautification committee at this point in time. And the Improvement Committee is looking at a couple of initiatives this year. We're exploring the gateway entrance signage that we've talked about before. We put money in the budget to get started on this project, have worked on some grant applications as well. And we're looking at issuing an RFP to actually start this project this year and hopefully have it installed in 2022. We also, and there's a motion on the meeting tonight about the Waterfront Master Plan design and the encouragement of developing that entrance to the downtown. It was great to hear the presentation earlier about the need to connect the downtown to the waterfront. And so there's a motion on the table tonight about this as well. And the role of the improvement committee is to really look at long-term planning, staffing needs, personnel issues, and monitoring initiatives that the town, as well as the as independent developers are looking at doing that may affect and impact the BIA membership in the downtown. So it's really our long-term future planning committee. Beautification, I think you all agree that our decor last year was spectacular. We were very lucky in that we were able to secure some wonderful Christmas decor at a very reduced price due to some sales from from a manufacturer that was dealing with some malls out of Quebec, and it made the downtown was just spectacular. We couldn't do a lot of our events, but we certainly made it a welcoming place for the community. Our beautification committee, this year we're finalizing the garden master plan. It's almost done. We're also working with the town and the new pollinator group to install some pollinator gardens in the parking lot borders, and we're very, very keen to work with the town staff in putting those first ones in the ground this year. We're also looking at wrapping some of those very bizarre or very bland looking utility boxes that are throughout the downtown. We've done an inventory. We're working with the town and EPCOR on accessing use of them. And the first one should be going in adjacent to the lawyer's office at the corner of 3rd and Ontario in the next little while. We'll be using our local artists and celebrating them, as well as some historical vignettes that show what downtown used to look like. Of course, our maintenance committee is working with the town's works department to ensure that our downtown is kept clean. The new Ed, our street vacuum, has been out on the street, and we're really getting lots of feedback from that. It's been good. It's good for the downtown, and it really does a much better job than the broom and bag that we were using for so many years. And we're looking at working with Works to ensure that the snow removal continues, and probably looking at a new piece of equipment in the fall of 2021 so that it does a better job of it. The promotion committee, we have certainly the Christmas market was a wonderful success. We're looking at the plan to continue with that, as well as perhaps putting some in the summer season or the in spring and summer season, depending on where we're at with COVID. We've got a big event, and if you can flip to, sorry, the next slide. We're working with, and this is several of our committee members that are both public and BIA members, on a Fashion Week event the last week in September. It will, right now, we're hoping to do a lot of it as a live experience, but also working with virtual components to it as well. So we have a great fashion retail sector downtown, and this is a sector that we haven't really promoted well in the past with our events. So this is a new initiative that the promotion committee is looking at getting underway in the latter part of September. And of course, depending on where we're at with COVID, we're continuing, the farmers market will continue. We'll be looking at the same format as last year to start with, and hopefully, but as the season goes on, we'll be able to make it a little more like the traditional farmers market. So those are some of the things that we're working on. And we're also looking at improving member engagement, working at getting some of our volunteers out and discussing issues with our members, as well as website and social media updates that make it a little easier for people to find us and to promote what we do. We have this is of course estimated, it's still subject to the audit report, but we did very well with the 2020 year. We had expected to take quite a bit of transfer from reserve in order to make the budget balance, but we had certainly some savings in capital expenditures with the way we were able to access the Christmas and seasonal decor. And there was some delays in some planned projects, including the garden electrical replacement, as well as the wayfinding signage that's part of the Main Street program. Our 2020 budget, which you have a detail of as well, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you have about it. We are keeping the levy the same at $450,000. And then there's a couple of projects, the snow blower, the electrical and wayfinding that was part of the taken from reserve last year, as well as the work on the archway. We're looking at taking a bit of money from reserve, as well as funding a lot of our initiatives through grants, sponsorships, and fees that we undertake with the market. And I think that's it, unless there's any specific questions about any of the line items or any of the initiatives. I'd be quite happy to answer those as well. And thank you for your time, and a special thank you to Deputy Mayor Hull for his work as our council representative. And of course, to the clerk's office, who do a wonderful job in assisting us through the process and making sure that we're doing things right. And it's difficult when you're sitting with a board of directors who are made up of business people who are used to doing things right away and making quick decisions about their business, and putting them in a municipal environment is always stressful.
Very much, Sue. That was a very good presentation. The BIA has been extremely busy this year and really did transform the downtown. So with the light show. So thank you for your work, and thank you to the BIA members for all that they've done to beautify the downtown and for the work they continue to do.
Thank you.
Council, are there questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you very much, and through you to Sue. Please pass on my many kudos to the board members, and certainly to yourself and to Deputy Mayor Hall. After coming off a year like probably none other, you continue to approach the management of our downtown with energy and with creativity. And I'm very excited for what the year holds. I'm just going to drill down to one particular question because it has been a bugbear of mine. You talk about pollinator gardens in some of the beds in our parking lots, and I'm just wondering if that might include the parking lot behind the Arlington, adjacent to the Eddie Bush Arena.
Sue?
I'm not sure about the plan. I know they were looking at the North St. Marie lot initially, but the plan is the overall draft plan for the garden, the master plan that we've been putting together with the consultants, shows that they would go in all of our parking lot borders. So I'm certainly hoping that's part of the plan. But we're working with, of course, Green Space to ensure that we can all make it all happen.
Excellent. Well, they could use a helping hand, those poor little gardens. So
I know.
Again, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much.
Any additional questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, the resolution reads that the Standing Committee receive and approve the 2021 Collingwood Downtown BIA budget to be forwarded to the treasurer and included in the tax rate bylaw. I get a mover and a seconder. Well, why don't we get the deputy mayor and then Councillor Jeffrey. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sue. Under other business, we also have an update from CAO Skinner on our work on the ICBL and efforts to reach out to the engineering community and the stakeholders. And so with that, I will pass it over to CAO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did want to provide a couple of points, and it'll take me just a moment, but I think they're all important. And so firstly, I wanted to talk about what had led us to this point. The current water treatment plant was constructed 23 years ago, and the design included providing the town of Blue Mountains and New Tech with support for their water needs. In 2016, we had some consulting engineers provide an opinion that identified the need for enhanced chlorine dosing to provide achieve the full rated capacity of the plant. And In 2016, we also reached the 80% capacity of the plant. We had some years of reduced demand caused by the departure of some large industrial users, unfortunately, for their departure. And however, we do have a new trend that's gone on for several years with increased water consumption from residents. In 2018, we found an error, was likely there for a long time, and it was proactively discovered by staff. And it was in the application of the formula used for chlorine contact time. This is a very important parameter to make sure that our water is safe for the public. The correction of this parameter involved a full review by what's now called the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. However, the new chlorine dosing parameters, depending on what you look at as the maximum dosing, meant that almost overnight, we had a portion of our water treatment capacity disappear, at least in winter conditions. In 2019, we restarted negotiations with New Tecumseh for expansion of the water treatment plant and launched the environmental assessment. As well, in 2019, some changes in the planning department organization yielded an understanding that we could use a stronger policy framework for capacity allocation for new developments in Collingwood. But we hadn't yet at that time in 2019 had a realization of how constrained our water actually is. In early 2020, discussions between Planning and Environmental Services Department continued to determine approaches for determining the capacity and establish a policy framework that can be used for that. And in 2020, we also achieved the completion of the Water and Wastewater Master Servicing Plan. So this was a critical step in determining the water allocation for future development submissions. The Master Servicing Plan tells us how much water we'll ultimately need. However, through an awareness of what's happening with development trends, the types of application that are coming down the various sets of approval, the more urgent challenge became how to manage the existing capacity over time until the completion of our water treatment expansion in 2025. In late 2020, I personally became aware of the planning concerns as well as a water reduction situation, and that they were both materializing as an issue, although full information was not yet available. However, between that time and January 2021, I realized what was happening and called a multi-department meeting on the water capacity issue involving our legal counsel as well, and that was around the 21st or 22nd of January. And we were able to go forward to talk with council in camera in March. As you know, and have already voted to acknowledge, this is a real problem. Staff do take accountability that these challenges could and should have come forward to council earlier. We are within the implementation of a better way to communicate between building and public works. We are maturing from a smaller town to a different entity, a larger, more sophisticated entity, while I think under the community-based strategic plan, retaining our character, the Collingwood character. And I can say that hindsight is 2020, having not been distracted by many things that have happened in the last year or two, and potentially the state of the department when current management took it over, various different managers, we would have potentially treated things much differently. However, I do think that a reasonable approach was taken. As it was presented to council, and I believe to be the true situation, I don't think council had other viable options to act right now. And it had to act last week in the interest of all the taxpayers. We have enough water to say go maybe 2 years with what we have today. Depends on development pace and what each development would use. But it's 4 years, potentially plus some months until the expanded drinking water treatment plant is producing water. New applications, I say may come in, they will come in over that period of the full 4 years. I did personally ask that a detailed analysis be performed to see if there was any way we could stretch that water to 2025, given what we have, continue considering the potential pace of building. If, for example, we could have had conservation or other things that were guaranteed at the time last Monday when council made their decision. And I could not show a viable path with risks that were judged acceptable to our existing users and our town obligations. I recognize that developers and consultants are our partners in town development. They believe in this town. They've invested their money here. They've helped us to build the town. They've helped us to build public spaces. And the approach that we've taken, communicated to everyone in town and to our development industry, comprehensive and immediately, and as soon as practical after this information was known, that it was important to pause everything and take a look at this. It is a blunt instrument, and I heard a few of the presenters to council last Monday say that it is, but it does apply to everyone at exactly the same time and provides us with what we need just today to move forward. Staff did look at other options, such as holding provisions or conditions that could be provided across the broad swath of the geography of Collingwood, and which is essentially anywhere that uses our water and wastewater system or may use it. And if desired, I can speak to this further at another time. We have a set amount of water that is less than we previously expected to get us under our official plan to 2025. And council must be enabled, and I think are now enabled, to look at what will keep us in line to be a complete community and achieve our strategic plan until that time. And I think there was a lot of discussion and community input and a review of all the possible options before council's endorsement last Monday. I do want to emphasize going forward that this is a pause. Projects that have a building permit in hand and can go forward. There are exemptions for projects including decks, patios, fences, porches, accessory buildings or structures, temporary buildings, and as well as interior or exterior renovations to a building or an expansion to an existing building under the current use. So I know we've already approved at least one building permit under this scenario within Collingwood this past week. Development approvals can continue. We heard from a number of developers that we should not stop the processing of applications that are further back in the development process. They're doing their environmental assessment, impact studies, they're doing their traffic studies, they're talking with staff. Those things can continue. This does not pause the development process overall. It pauses the connection of people to water until we can make some good decisions, until we can make some good recommendations to council who will make decisions going forward. An ICBL does not have to last a year. That is the allowance without a renewal under the Planning Act. If it is possible to lift this under a year, we absolutely will make that recommendation to council. As our community partners and council members have noted, I also have concerns about local jobs. I have concerns about affordable housing, among others, and those are motivating me and staff to look at all the options and to move as quickly as it is humanly possible to do so to escort our community through this challenge. Finally, since last Monday, the following have happened. We've launched an engage page for anyone who wants to provide, to look at the information available and provide any questions. We're answering those both to individuals and to the public overall, depending on if it's about an individual's site, for example, it would go to the individual. There's some commonly asked questions that will be posted soon. We'll post all the submissions that were received prior to last Monday's council meeting. And we know that council had asked that we have collaborative discussions. We have done those, started those with the town of Blue Mountains this morning, and to determine what quantity of water can we return to Collingwood to assist with moving development forward. And technical staff will meet again as soon as possible to discuss those parameters. We also agreed to further reach out to the province because we're going to need their help to adjust use among the municipal licenses for water, potentially among other things. We have also, per the council direction, continued discussions with staff at the town of New Tecumseth and provided the position, Collingwood's firm position, that we view our community's needs as a priority and we will need the return of some capacity. We've been providing them with 9,500 cubic meters a day since about 2008, in line with our contract to ramp up supplies that has now expired. New Tecumseh staff indicated that development is already delayed in their municipality, and they've been working on more groundwater wells to supplement what Collingwood provides. They already do that. They have some wells online. Staff, including myself, are sorting through a full understanding of the New Tecumseh system, and we are accountable to council and the public to do a good job on this so that we can have those negotiations run as well as possible. And New Tecumseh staff have committed to review potentially modest summer and or winter opportunity and to reply. There's a meeting set with the development community this week, as you've already heard, and we appreciate that. And representatives of the local engineering community have also proactively reached out to us. There's an initial meeting tomorrow and a second technical meeting has been set up for the week after. We're meeting with an expert this week to aggressively work toward the detailed scope of the land use planning study, and it will be followed by a process to onboard the best suited consultant. Adam Farr is unfortunately sick tonight, or I would have asked him to speak to this point as well. We have significant water conservation programs and bylaws in place today. However, we welcome input from the community and expect an update to come forward and provide more details to you in the coming weeks, as well as we'll be looking at this from a number of points of view. Finally, one of the items in the staff report, which I spoke to briefly last Monday, is whether council can and should provide any further exemptions for our community's highest priority work. And I commit that staff are working hard on this to examine what can be done and what fair and equitable criteria may be used to frame this decision. I want to make everyone aware within the community that this file is a very high priority. We are trying and believe we do understand some of the implications caused by this pause and that we need to move quickly. We will provide updates at every opportunity, including any applicable committee and council meeting, as well as an overall plan once we get our consultant on board on how we will work through this challenge together. Thank you for this opportunity to provide an update to council and the public today.
Thank you, Sonia. And I think I speak on behalf of council when I say this is probably the biggest priority of this term. We are determined to work through this with our public, with our staff, and with our stakeholders, and that we have every intention of lifting that ICBL within the year and making sure that we move forward as quickly as possible on all fronts. So this is definitely a very large priority, and it will be a consuming interest for this council and our community. Council, any questions or comments for CAO Skinner? Councillor McLeod.
Thank you very much for that thorough update, CAO Skinner. And what it leads me to is a notice of motion regarding it, which I can just read in now if you'd like, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Be it resolved that each meeting of Collingwood Council henceforth until the ICBL is lifted shall contain an agenda item referring to the ICBL, including updates on progress from all departments affected, concerning but not limited to negotiations regarding water supply agreements, RFP issuance, tendering, and construction of the new water treatment plant and funding requirements thereof. exemptions to the ICBL requested, building permit applications, occupancy permits issued, and remaining water supply as expressed in SDUs and meters cubed, and any other information deemed applicable.
Thank you for that. So we will deal with that motion at our next council meeting. Councillor Cloud, go ahead.
I have one more question for the CAO. And I think you can't answer it because Director Farr is not here, but I know that we have building permits, people with building permits in hand that have not been built. Those developments have not been built. And I know that I have been provided with this information previously, but I would like to know what that number is when it comes to SDUs. Or even just dwelling units. And I wonder if that could be provided to council in the next little while. Thank you.
CAO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to be sure that I'm clear on the question, you're looking for the number of building permits that are currently open within our community and therefore progressing despite the ICBL?
Correct.
Okay, no problem. We will commit to provide that information as soon as it's available.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any other questions or comments? Is there any other business today, Council? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a notice of motion I would like to read in for deal with at a future meeting. And I'm just going to read it here. Whereas council has a statutory duty to exercise a level of care, diligence, and skill. Sorry, I have to get my dog out of here. Technical difficulties. Hold on. Joys of working at home with Byron. Okay, start again. Whereas council has a statutory duty to exercise a level of care, diligence, and skill of a reasonably prudent person in our oversight of the town's drinking water system. Accordingly, council has the obligation to be informed, ask questions, and seek advice from those with experience and act prudently on that advice. And whereas today our water system is not currently oversubscribed, council must ensure that the town does not in the future operate a water quantity oversubscription scenario, which could cause a potential for a decrease in the quality of the town's treated water. And whereas staff have advised that the dosage of chlorine will need to be increased during cold water conditions to meet higher demands, recommending an upper chlorine residual target of 2.2 milligrams per liter, which limits available capacity. And as such, the available capacity needs to be managed to avoid an oversubscription scenario. And whereas staff also advised that any increase in chlorine dose increases the risk that chlorine spikes in the distribution system may exceed provincial regulatory limits for chlorine in the distribution system. And whereas council believes it is prudent to assess the level of risk of non-compliance and ensure appropriate measures to mitigate the risk are in place while providing the most capacity to future users that is prudent. Now therefore be it resolved that council of the town of Collingwood herein direct staff to retain and instruct a qualified third-party reviewer to conduct a peer review of the recommendations with respect to the chlorine dose of 2.2 milligrams per liter or higher to 1, assess the level of risk of noncompliance and suggest measures to minimize the potential risk of noncompliance, and 2, assess the effects and risks associated with higher chlorine dose from a health and safety perspective, i.e. user health and staff exposure, and suggest recommendations to minimize such risks. And further, the council requests staff report back to council with the conclusions and any concerns with potential implications on public health and respective mitigation measures or other recommendations of the third-party reviewer, including any consultation with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks as deemed appropriate by staff. And further, the staff report back to council regarding any findings of potential non-compliance and public health implications or other concerns of the third-party reviewer that would require council consideration of alternative dosing strategy or mitigation measures. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to look to the clerk. We are past the hour of 5 p.m. and I just want to get a sense, Sarah, of what the plan is with corporate and community services. Are we going to complete this meeting first, or what is the suggested course of action here?
Certainly, Your Worship. We have posted on our agenda indicating that the corporate community services would start immediately following the SIC, should the SIC go later than 5 p.m. And staff are communicating about posting such information should individuals try to be logged into our corporate and community services meeting.
Okay, thank you. So I think we've concluded other business, and that brings us to item 9, which is public delegations. Sarah, is there anyone in our gallery who would like to speak to council today?
Yes, there is, Your Worship.
Just a quick note here, Town Council. It's Matt Preddy, Town of Collingwood, Minnesota Street. Here's a quick one. The garden suites expansion above garage, or separate dwelling. Just maybe to plug that as a sustainable, the UN sustainability goals, looking at sustainability, we should keep that going, that discussion about sustainability, so we can keep things in that regional sense. If we could just talk about that at further meetings about, supporting that and encouraging people to possibly develop capacity within their own private lots in relation to sustainable communities. That is the big goal, and I hope we can consider solutions as we go forward through the COVID crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Sarah, is there any other members of our gallery that would like to speak to council?
Certainly, Your Worship. Mr. Leo Longo has indicated a request to speak.
Okay.
Previously, I do not see that his hand is raised, so okay, we will allow Mr. Longo to speak.
Mr. Longo, good afternoon.
Hi, Your Worship. I wasn't intending to say much other than I appreciate the update the CAO was provided. And I'd certainly like, on behalf of my 3 clients that addressed the committee on Monday, to be at the table when she has that discussion with the development community later this week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And there's no further requests, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And that next item then is our in-camera session. And I will read the motion. Quick comments, perhaps. Well, when I get to it, maybe you could just read in the additional item. I don't know how we've described that. So I'll start the motion, and then I'll look to you to add that final bullet, if you could, please. Whereas the clerk hereby concurs the reasons for the in-camera session have been duly reviewed and considered, and the matters are authorized under the exception provisions to conduct a closed session in accordance with the Municipal Act prior to proceeding into closed session. Therefore, be it resolved that this council proceeds in camera in order to address a matter pertaining to 1, litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the towns or a local board, which is item B. 2, the receiving of advice that is necessary to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, and those are items A and B. The items are the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry and 2 LPAT matters. Clerk Almus, if you can maybe provide some detail that we've got on the addendum with respect to the final item.
Yes, I can. The whereas line has changed to say whereas the clerk and/or CAO hereby concur. And the item added is a personal matter about an identifiable individual, including a municipal or local board employee. And the item for discussion is C, and it is a personnel matter.
Okay, thank you. Council, can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Madigan, second by Councillor Doherty. Any questions or comments before I call the vote? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is approved unanimously. Thank you. I'll just look to the clerk. Do we have a separate link for this meeting? All right, council, it's now 1:15. I'm going to call the meeting to session in 10 minutes. So it'll be 25 after. Thank you.
Okay, Your Worship, we are live.
All right. So the deputy mayor left the meeting, so we are now have full session, and I will look for a motion to rise from in camera at 8:29, moved by Councillor Berman and seconded by Councillor Hamlin. All in favor? That is passed unanimously. And I think we have a motion from in-camera session. Councillor Hamlin. You're on mute, Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. I believe the clerk may have, it would be best if
Oh,
she could read
you know
that
what? I
motion.
think perhaps I have that. Just a second.
Yeah.
All right. So the motion is as follows. Whereas periods of limitation may be approaching pertaining to some further legal action against any associated party relating to the judicial inquiry necessitating a non-standard procurement, be it resolved that council herein retain the services of BLG to ascertain potential action against various parties related to the Collingwood judicial inquiry at a fixed cost to not exceed $15,000. So 15,000. I think that was moved by Councillor Hamlin. And is there a seconder, please? Councillor Jeffrey. Council, comments or questions before we call the vote? Councillor Comey.
Just thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to state once again that it's my position that our residents have reached their spending limit on this matter, period. It is time for staff and our residents to hear that there are many other pressing issues deserving of time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty, did you have your card up?
I did, Your Worship, but Councillor Comey very eloquently expressed the same comments. Thank you.
Councillor McLeod.
I would propose an amendment to this that staff continue to press our insurance agents for compensation, any compensation that can be done.
Yes, I'm looking to Councillor Hamlin. She is comfortable with that amendment, and Councillor Jeffrey is the seconder. Are you comfortable with that amendment?
And further, that staff be directed to provide to the OPP any information which may come from the report from Mr. Roger that may be of interest to them in their ongoing investigation.
That's fine with me. Thank you.
Okay, I'm looking to the moving parties are comfortable with those amendments. Any further comments, Councillor McLeod?
Thank you. Yes, and I have some questions regarding the EPCOR papers that we own, or do we own them? And my question I threw you, Mr. Mayor, is to the CAO. So is the contents of the information in, as you've told us in open session, were dozens of boxes and drawers and USB sticks. Is that under the ownership of the town and therefore available for FOI purposes, et cetera, as all other records are?
CAO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have the full answer to that question through you to Councillor McLeod this evening. I'm not as clear about the hard copy papers that remain under the contract in the under the care and control of EPCOR, and we'd need to seek some opinions on that. There are a number of emails that are now ecollis.com emails that are in the possession of the town, and it's our understanding that they would be subject to the normal FOI procedure, which would include seeking the consent of any third parties and all of the MFIPA requirements. And should something like that start to move forward, we would need to seek a final legal opinion on that front, but that would be my understanding today. Thank you.
Any follow-up, Councillor McLeod?
And how long is it that we are required to keep those records, and how long is it that EPCOR is required to keep those records? 3 years.
Go ahead, Sonia.
Under the contract of sale with EPCOR, the former records, I believe, were required to be kept for 10 years, and there's strict confidentiality requirements, as well as potentially other requirements through legislation that EPCOR and through the contract that we would be required to adhere with for those hard copy records. With respect to the emails and what may happen to them going forward, I don't know the answer to that part of the question right now. We need to follow up on how long they would be retained beyond today, but they're not at imminent danger of destruction, but over the years to come, that could certainly happen.
Thank you.
Councillor Doherty, you've already spoken, so I'm going to go around and see if there's anyone else who wants to comment on the motion before we go back. Anyone else want to comment? All right, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. I had wanted just to ask a question in regard to the proposed amendment, and that was, is it safe to assume that staff would be pursuing every avenue via insurance and via the Attorney General's office to recoup expenses incurred by the town as a result of the judicial inquiry? Does this require a motion of council?
Well, I think we put it in there, but I'll look to the clerk to answer that.
So we will be pursuing, sorry, through your worship to Councillor Doherty, we will be pursuing every option with regards to insurance. As noted, I can't recall specifically the Attorney General's office was with respect to.
There was some effort also to recoup expenses from the Attorney General's office relative to JI recommendations that would apply to the province. So that would happen regardless.
I'll have to ask CAO Skinner to speak to
CAO
that.
Skinner, go ahead, Sonia.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Doherty. We have a couple of things in action, active requests based on Council's direction previously that were initiated to ask the province to contribute. And until they reply, and or the correspondence is dead, I would assume that we would continue to actively seek any compensation that's available from the province, although not specifically through the Attorney General. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any other comments or questions? Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. Earlier this evening, I talked about the fact that we knew enough to know that there's shenanigans contained in the EPCOR papers based on what we've learned in the judicial inquiry. But I've been convinced by the arguments made in open session. I'll be supporting this, or in closed session rather. I'll be supporting this motion.
Thank you. All right, the judicial inquiry was a huge undertaking for our community and a huge investment, and $15,000 to finally determine if there is a plausible course of action against any of the agents involved, to me is a way to finally close this and to find out if there's a feasible action. So I will be supporting it as well. And this is a report from the lawyers. I know our staff are extremely engaged in everything involved with the ICBL and our current water situation. So we are focused at Town Hall at addressing that. This last investment is to see if there is any realistic way of recouping. And if there is not, then we will be moving on, but we will have done that knowing that we pursued all possibilities towards that end. And I think that is owed to our community. So that being said, I will call the vote then. All in favor? Opposed?
Just go on ahead.
So noted. So that is carried. And I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. So Councillor Jeffrey, thank you very much. Motion to adjourn. Actually though, before I do call the vote on that, I'm just going to look to the clerk with respect to our Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee meeting. We have gone well over time in this SIC meeting, and wondering what the thoughts are on the Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee meeting, given that I gather some of the deputants had to leave.
Certainly, Your Worship. With respect to the procedural bylaw regarding quorum is generally expected to be present within 20 minutes after the time of a meeting. However, if there is previous notification that attendance will be delayed due to extenuating circumstances, the committee could carry on. So we did identify in the SIC agenda that it would happen immediately following. However, we're at 3.5 hours later from the commencement time. We've received notifications from individuals wishing to watch that they are asking that it be rescheduled for a later date. If not, some have provided comment to us. So it will be Council's direction or SIC's thoughts.
Yes. Chair McLeod.
Thank you. I was reviewing the procedural bylaw as well at times, and I believe we have item 4.25 in our procedural bylaw, which would allow us to open the meeting and immediately recess it to come to another time. And I think that would satisfy the requirements regarding quorum and notice. When I grow up, I want to be a clerk.
Okay, well then I will look to the clerk. I guess what we will do is convene the meeting and then recess it, and we will set the date and get that information out to our deputants and to the public. So to the balance of the SIC members, thank you very much for the meeting today, and to the Corporate Community Services, we will see you shortly. Councillor Jeffrey, your motion to adjourn. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much, everyone.